Well, okay, but certainly it's on every day. Yes, Mr. Member. You had asked me to make copies of stuff this morning, and there are sets of copies for all of them and provided for the clerk already. What? Yes? Is that what you would like? That's what you asked. You said the email that you sent on January 6th. And I presented copies of that to all the
Okay. Meeting will come to order. We are now holding our regularly scheduled meeting for the Indian River County Board of County Commissioners for January 13, 2015, 9 a.m. And at this time, I would like to call on Deputy Teddy Floyd from the Indian River County Sheriff's Department to give the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance to be followed by Vice Chairman Commissioner Bob Solari. Teddy, welcome. Please rise.
First of all, Happy New Year, Commissioners.
Thank you, Teddy.
Thank you, Teddy. All right, let us bow our heads. Father, we thank you. We thank you for a new year. We thank you for the new challenges, God, but most of all, we thank you for wisdom and understanding. We ask that you bless each and every official in our county, our sheriffs, our police chiefs, everyone within the sound of my voice. We ask that you bless our commission, understanding, God, give them the wisdom and everything that they need to continue to make our Indian River County safe. And we'll be ever so careful to give you the praise. Let us say amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. That moves us to the orders of the day. Is there any modifications or additions, deletions to the agenda? In that case, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve as presented.
We're deleting, Bill Rigby called and he would like to be removed from the agenda.
Very well. Very well. We will delete Mr. Rigby's public discussion item from the agenda. Is there any further modifications? If not, I've got a motion from Commissioner O'Brien and a second from myself to accept the orders of the day. All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion passes unanimously. That moves us to item 5A, which is was postponed from last meeting due to the fact that Commissioner Solari was under the weather. Commissioner Solari, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a present today about the process of the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program reorganization. I'll apologize at the start for the length of this presentation. It will at times be a little bit dull and tedious, but I've actually worked to cut out a lot of the superfluous material and have condensed a body of material which could easily have been 5 times as long. Today, as I said, my focus is not on the substance of the proposed Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program interlocal agreement, but rather on the process of how the proposed interlocal agreement was generated. First, I'd like a quote, and this one is by President Calvin Coolidge. President Coolidge said, "It is much more important to kill bad bills than it is to pass good ones." I believe that these words, especially in view of the flood of bad laws in the past few years, particularly from Washington, are as valid today as they were when they were first uttered by President Coolidge. And I preface my remarks today about the proposed interlocal agreement with what I take to be a self-evident statement. The entire Indian River Board of County Commissioners understands that the health of the Indian River Lagoon is imperiled, that we must actively work to return it to health, and that we are committed to do all that we reasonably can to return the lagoon to a healthy condition. Indian River County began its work to clean the lagoon many years ago. It has put in place a number of projects that remove nitrogen and phosphorus, like the Egret Marsh and Spoonville Marsh projects. The Osprey Marsh will soon be in operation, adding to these efforts. In the lagoon itself, we recently established a new oyster reef, the first of what I believe will be a series of oyster reefs put in the lagoon to help filter and clean the water. We can and we will return the lagoon to health. But as elected officials, we need to proceed in a way that is open and transparent and is consistent with the principles of good government. principles which support our form of representative democracy. The existing Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program is being reorganized. The reorganization has been rushed from the start with a single goal of getting a new organization in place as soon as possible. The rush to a new interlocal agreement has been repeatedly justified by saying, now is the time to get buckets of state and federal funds for new projects. We must complete the reorganization now as quickly as possible in order to get as much money as possible. Interestingly, repeated almost as a mantra right after more money now has been the idea that the reorganized IRL NEP will result in more local control. I will note that there has never been a discussion on how the IRL NEP was to be reorganized to result in more local control, and my reading of the agreement tells me that rather than more local control, what local control there is will be significantly eroded. I will now relate highlights of the project, beginning with the first time the possibility of reorganization was mentioned to the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program Advisory Board. April 30th, 2014, IRL NEP Advisory Board meeting. Drew Bartlett, Deputy Director of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, asks to be added to the agenda in order to float an idea. He is added to the agenda, and later, as the minutes of the meeting state, Mr. Bartlett led the board in a discussion about whether the St. Johns River Water Management District should remain the IRL NEP sponsor or if another form of sponsorship is appropriate. June 25th, 2014, the IRL NEP Advisory Board meeting. Reorganization of the existing IRL NEP is discussed, and an IRL Advisory Board subcommittee is formed. I volunteered for and was appointed to the subcommittee. Staff was directed to get certain information, including examples of mission statements of other NEPs. None of this information was ever presented to the subcommittee. The minutes of the meeting show that the subcommittee was given 6 specific duties: create the structure of an NEP, determine policy board members, consider management board members, draft the interlocal agreement, draft a mission statement, determine appropriate funding level for the NEP. On August 18, 2014, the first meeting of the subcommittee was held. Before the meeting, an interlocal agreement was drafted by staff for discussion with no subcommittee input and was sent to the subcommittee members. Minutes of the August 18th meeting suggest that the subcommittee began by discussing the draft agreement. This is false. It was a 2-hour meeting, and the first hour was basically me asking multiple foundation questions and asking for the response to be in writing. The questions were basically sidestepped, and there was never a written response from staff. The subcommittee did not address 5 of the 6 duties charged to us by the advisory board. Interestingly, during the discussion, the subcommittee was told that the governor spoke with DEP and was told to make it more locally responsive, that it was to be a locally driven program at the grassroots level. The IRL NEP interim director Maurice Sterling said at the meeting, "Your advisory board voted unanimously to move the Tampa Bay model." I recall no such vote. The minutes reflect no such vote, and the statement is contradicted by the fact that the minutes clearly show that the advisory board charged the committee to create the structure of the NEP. The subcommittee did discuss during the review of the staff drafted interlocal agreement 1 of the 6 duties that it was given. It discussed the policy board members that staff had presented in the draft. I said that the 3 agencies listed, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the St. Johns River Water Management District, and the South Florida Management District, should not be voting members. Henry Dean, an advisor to the St. Johns River Water Management District, responded by saying, "I can say with some assurance they need a voice if they are to contribute such a substantial number of their ad valorem dollars." He then made a stronger statement, "Neither department nor 2 districts will participate if they are not voting members." Very importantly, these statements persuaded the subcommittee to leave the agencies as voting members of the policy board. However, a subsequent public information request shows Mr. Dean's statements to be false. The minutes of the September 9, 2004 governing meeting of the St. Johns River Water Management District, which authorized, quote, "the executive director or his designee to negotiate and execute a new Indian River National Estuary Program interlocal agreement and provide $500,000 in fiscal year 2014-2015 funding to the program, unquote, does not include a requirement that a member from the St. Johns River Water Management District be a voting member of the advisory board. An audio of the meeting confirms that the requirement that someone from the St. Johns be a voting member of the new IRL NEP in order for St. John's to fund the new IRL NEP was never discussed at the governing board meeting. The public information request also asked about the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's requirement to be a voting member before it would provide funding. The response to the public information request states, there are no responsive documents relating to this item. Given that the subcommittee was told that the idea of reorganization came from the governor's office, I did another public information request to the governor. I asked for any memorandum or directive from the governor's office which directs FDEP, the St. John's of South Florida, to have a vote on the reorganized IRL NEP before making any monetary contribution to the IRL NEP. And I also asked for any policy from the governor's office that would suggest that FDEP, St. John's, or South Florida would be required a vote on the reorganization of the IRL NEP before any monetary contribution could be made by FDEP, St. John's, South Florida to the IRL NEP. The response from the Governor's Office of Open Government states, quote, a search of the Executive Office of the Governor's files produced no responsive records, unquote. In short, based on the responses to the public information requests, there is absolutely no basis for Mr. Dean's assertions that neither the department nor two districts will participate if they are not voting members. September 8, 2014, I sent a letter to Maurice Sterling outlining the problems in the reorganization process, particularly regarding lack of financial information, failure to have any meaningful discussion on the new organization's goals and objectives, and reliance on a 6-year-old comprehensive conservation and management plan, which the interim director had said was, quote, long in the tooth, as the basis of the new IRL NEP. I did ask that this letter be made part of the agenda package, but was told, erroneously, that this would be a violation of the Sunshine Laws. On September 18, 2014, by this time it was clear that the existing IRL NEP had no meaningful financial information and no clue as to what its costs would be going forward. I invited the IRL NEP interim director to the county to try to develop some financial information. Budget Director Jason Brown and I met with Mr. Sterling, another St. Johns River Water Management District employee, and by phone, 2 members of the St. Johns River Water Management District Accounting Department. I'd now ask Jason Brown to come up and give his opinion of that meeting and his opinion of the financial information that was available from St. John's concerning the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, Jason Brown, County Budget Director. Yes, as Commissioner Solari stated, we met with the folks from St. John's in order to try and get a better handle on the finances in order to develop the estimated cost to run this standalone agency. It was very difficult to get good financial information that we could depend on in creating that. They had some information where we could get little pieces and parts, but we weren't able to get good financial statements or a good handle on exactly what the expenses would need to be in order to have a standalone agency going forward. They provided us some information, but we weren't able to get what I would call good enough information, reliable information that we could use as a framework for establishing those estimated costs going forward.
I'll just ask you one question, Jason. Based on the information we were given at that day and that we could even draw out after some discussion, would you consider that sufficient financial information for $1 million company?
No.
Okay, thank you. And I will note that Jason did a very good job on putting together a set of pro forma financials based on the information that was provided and that we could draw out, and based on some assumptions that he made about what might happen going forward. This information was ignored at the next subcommittee meeting. So we have an organization, responsibility for roughly $1 million in taxpayer dollars, reorganizing for essentially one reason, to get a lot more in the way of taxpayer dollars, and neither the subcommittee nor the advisory board has had one meaningful discussion on a proposed budget, or financial controls, or how they will present financial information and account for taxpayer dollars in the future. September 24th, 2014, Advisory Board meeting. During this meeting, the draft interlocal was discussed, and importantly, everyone at the meeting was told that they could suggest changes and make comments regarding the interlocal draft agreement. November 19th, 2014, the second and last meeting of the subcommittee. The meeting began with me challenging the minutes of the August 18th subcommittee as inadequate because they totally failed to mention the first hour of the 2-hour meeting. In just part, I said, the minutes reflect that a discussion about the interlocal agreement took place, but nothing of substance is noted in the minutes that might help any member of the IRL NEP Advisory Board or the public, which would help them better understand the process and reasoning behind what was done by the design team. The first hour of the August 18th meeting, where I tried to generate a meaningful discussion about what I thought were essential issues, was omitted from the minutes. At the November 19th meeting, I read a long statement about the problems with the process and the failure to address the duties that the advisory board had given to the subcommittee. This statement was essentially ignored, and the meeting basically turned over to Carolyn Ansay, an attorney hired not by the design team or the subcommittee, but by the South Florida Water Management District to draft an interlocal agreement. Importantly, though at least 11 groups submitted comments at the invitation of the advisory board to the subcommittee, none of these comments were discussed. In fact, when we went to the meeting, 2 of us actually had copied out the comments. They basically pretty much fill a binder, and I went to the meeting actually thinking we were going to discuss some of the comments that members of the public and different organizations took the time to write, but they were totally passed over, and we were directed immediately to Ms. Ansay. Mr. Reingold attended that meeting, and I'll now ask him to give us his recollection of how that meeting went.
Thank you very much. I think I might have provided a little bit more than that just in my notes about the meeting, but essentially...
Oh, go ahead. Speak.
The group was going to make a recommendation concerning an interlocal agreement that would cross 5 counties, 2 water management districts, and FDEP. And the group's goal was to be finished as soon as possible. I'm not talking about days to weeks. This was folks who sat down at the table and expected to hammer out an interlocal agreement that in a meeting that started at 10:30 and hoped to be done by lunch. Although several different drafts of the ILA had been circulated amongst all of the members, the group simply went to focus on the draft that had been presented by the South Florida Water Management District Attorney. The group was not interested in examining the strengths and weaknesses of the prior organizational structure. There was no real contemplation of long-term impacts or decisions. I can say my recollection of the meeting specifically was Commissioner Solari opened up with a statement about his concerns, and throughout the meeting, Commissioner Solari would make a motion, and all I would hear was that dies for lack of a second, followed by all the other votes being consistently 4-1. The group is working on an interlocal agreement for an organization that will be around for many, many years, and that it will have a significant goal to return the lagoon to health. And with that in mind, I find it shocking that this group's goal was to get such an ILA in place and accomplished within 90 minutes. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Commissioner Solari.
Thank you very much. On December 17th, 2014, there was an Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program Advisory Board meeting. At this meeting, there was basically a rush to pass an interlocal agreement for the new IRL NEP. I tried to bring up a number of issues and problems and was basically told to shut up, that the lagoon needed this agreement now. So, after my initial attempts to discuss those items that would be required in any rational process, I simply voted against the series of motions as Ms. Ansay's interlocal agreement was discussed and moved forward. At the end of the meeting, with a new interlocal approved by all save one, a member of the St. Johns River Water Management District Governing Board, who sits on the IRL NEP, said that now we must go for the big ask. Now we need to ask for $1 billion. So, with no discussion of goals and objectives, no discussion of how the money could best be spent, with no structure to account for the monies received and dispensed, a new organization based on an organization that in the past handled roughly $1 million a year wants to be responsible for $1 billion of the taxpayers' money. A rush to a new organization, a subcommittee set up which ignores the duties charged to it by the advisory board, the most fundamental questions simply ignored. People regularly saying that the new IRL NEP will result in more local control, when control will clearly be in the hands of a staff controlled by the regulatory agencies. How could such an important process be moved forward in such an irrational manner? I came across what I believe to be the answer in documentation I received in a public information request that I made to the St. Johns River Water Management District. In the documentation was a contract. But first, a quote from the September 9th, 2014 issue of the St. Johns River Water Management District Water News. The quote, "The district's governing board today authorized entering into an interlocal agreement that is being drafted with area stakeholders that will outline the new organization structure and path forward. The agreement is being drafted by existing IRL NEP advisory board members and volunteers serving on the recently created design team for the IRL NEP." 2 points. First, this was actually the first time I recall the subcommittee being referred to as the design team. So the shadow bureaucracy did not even let the subcommittee come up with its own name. So the idea that the subcommittee or the design team was charged with coming up with the IRL NEP was what I thought was the purpose of the design team, to draft the new interlocal agreement. Clearly, I was wrong in thinking of this. The actual purpose of the design team became clearer to me when I read a part of a contract between the St. Johns River Water Management District and Henry Dean and Associates, LLC, that I came across only because of my public information request. On page 7, attachment B, statement of work 2, objective, it states, objective, to replicate the Tampa Bay Estuary Program entity and operational format for the management of the IRL NEP, ideally with the entity having federal tax status such that private contributions to it may be deductible as charitable contributions under the Internal Revenue Code. This contract was dated April 18th, 2014. This is before the design team was established, before, in fact, the design team was even discussed by the IRL NEP Advisory Board, before the April 13th meeting where the Deputy Director of FDEP said that he wanted to float an idea before the Advisory Board. And, in fact, before the Advisory Board voted to go forward with the reorganization of the IRL NEP. So before that time, some person or people in some agency already had decided what the outcome was to be, thought out how best to achieve that outcome, and arranged for a consultant to be paid, initially $30,000, later increased to $45,000 to reach that outcome. Again, this contract is dated April 18th, 2014, yet on April 30th, the FDEP deputy had to rush to be added to an agenda. And everybody here understands how government works. This idea had to have started months before that date. And I'll also note that as a design team member, I was never told that Mr. Dean had been hired as a consultant to help shepherd through this process. But if you look at other background information, you'll find that Mr. Dean was regularly in contact with different members of the design team. But again, none of this openly explained to anybody. You will not find any of this in any record of the IRL Advisory Board or the design team meetings. So, this explains the fact that some unnamed person had already determined what the outcome would be. This explains why the design team was given only the Tampa Bay-based interlocal agreement to discuss. It explains why attempts to have other issues discussed, like financial aspects of the new IRL NEP, goals and objectives of the new IRL NEP, mission statement, reasons why the prior model was unsuccessful, why numerous issues that one might rationally expect would be discussed if one were actually serious about creating a successful organization, were passed over with no discussion. What was the purpose of the design team charged according to the September 9th, 2014 issue of the St. Johns River Water Management District Water News with developing the new organization structure and path forward and drafting the new interlocal agreement? At this time, I can only guess that it was to provide political cover for some person or people who decided months ago that they wanted to change the direction of the IRL NEP. I, for one, would have appreciated being advised of this before offering to serve on the design team. If I had been made aware of this, made aware that the die had already been set, I would not have spent the 100 hours or so that I have spent trying to accomplish what the advisory board and others said that they had actually wanted. An open and transparent board that would give local governments more control and was actually interested in returning the lagoon to better health. Thank you very much for your patience and attention.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman Solari. Commissioners, any comments?
I have a couple of questions.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Zort.
And this could be directed to Jason or Bob, and sorry about my voice, I'm a little rough this morning. On the preliminary budget for the $1 million, was it basically just going to cover a lot of staff positions and not really leave any funding left for, I mean, I guess part of it is fill in the blank because they didn't say what they're going to spend it on in their organizational structure.
Yeah, I mean, Jason can correct me, but basically we took the information that we drew out after some time and just restructured it for going forward. But there was no real discussion about, say, employees.
Right.
Jason's number, interestingly, were based on 4 employees, and that was the discussion we had with Mr. Sterling and the accountants. But actually, a week or two ago when I reviewed the tapes, it was mentioned that there'd be 6 new employees. So that means our numbers are wrong to start with. But when Mr. Sterling reviewed the numbers himself, he never mentioned that fact. So we don't know how many employees they're going to have. But I was thinking again this weekend when I was preparing it, there's actually no reason to have this IRL NEP in terms of actually generating more funds because, and I haven't done all the work on this, but my guess is the administration, the IRL NEP is set up under the federal EPA.
Okay.
And the federal EPA is basically given around $500,000 to $550,000 a year. But the way the organization is being set up, it's very possible that the administrative cost would be more than $500,000 to $550,000 a year. So basically, every dollar from the EPA ends up being spent by the new IRL NEP. So again, as far as I can see, the whole thing has been a fully irrational and irresponsible process.
And secondly, I think each county's due structure is an equal amount. Is that correct? It's not based on miles of shoreline or distance of the lagoon.
Yeah, interestingly, the numbers they proposed were $50,000 for each county, which I find to be a very reasonable amount and would have no problem with if this had actually been done the way it should have been done. But more importantly, as far as I can tell, there have been questions about whether the commitment from the DEP, St. John's, and South Florida Water Management District would be ongoing. But apparently, and we had an opportunity to ask those agencies if their contributions would be ongoing for a period of years. But we didn't take advantage of that opportunity. Mm-hmm. We know that the commitment is for 1 year. There is no commitment for more than that. So we could be stuck with a bigger bureaucratic organization with no additional funding to take us forward. And again, I mean, there are different groups that could actually be the sponsoring organization. At this point, thinking about it, I don't see why the Indian River Collaborative couldn't be the sponsoring organization. Absolutely. And why some of the staff from the group couldn't be embedded in the different counties. Mm-hmm. And that would actually give us regular access to the staff. And I'll mention one other thing while I'm doing it. I mean, at the first, again, think about this. The advisory, the subcommittee that put this together spent less than 6 hours on this. This is less time than Jackie and I spend planning for our summer vacation. Seriously, this summer, Jackie and I hope to hire... Pardon?
That was in Vero Beach.
Jackie and I hope to hike out in Colorado. If we had spent so little time, say, planning the hikes, planning the equipment, planning, how to get there and back, if we had spent only 6 hours, or would spend only 6 hours, the vacation would totally fail. We wouldn't meet our objective of hiking 100 miles. Yet this group spends 6 hours, wants to be a $1 billion organization, and hasn't asked any of the basic fundamental questions. I just continually get astonished by that.
And the other one, this would be directed more to you, Commissioner, is I like it that they at least looked more at the Tampa Bay versus the Chesapeake one has been tossed around a lot, which I don't think is...
That's not coming.
Well, yeah. But if you look at the successes in Tampa Bay, where they received probably 70% of their benefit was the sulfur coal-fired plants that were on Tampa Bay, the sewer plants that had direct effluent discharge into Tampa Bay. They got 70% of their gain off of eliminating 2 known sources. And I've looked at the success from, if you take those off the table, they have no participation with DOT runoff structures, because I looked at the Crosstown Expressway, the Interstate 75, where those connect together, and looking at, do they involve any successes of their gains by looking at DOT runoff, which we know US 1, which runs the entire length of the lagoon, contributes a huge amount. So Tampa Bay is better than Chesapeake Bay, but it's not an exact great model, but it's better than the alternative I guess they were looking at one time.
Well, you mentioned the outfalls, but again, there was no substantive discussion of any sort. There was no discussion like that. I mean, right off the bat, I would think bay, estuary, there might be a couple differences you might want to discuss, but it was never discussed. And there was, again, a major point for me was that the advisory board told the subcommittee to come up with the structure of the NEP. It never did. The subcommittee did not come up with one significant paragraph in that agreement. This was all done by staff and by a staff-hired attorney. And the staff-hired attorney was simply hired by South Florida Water Management District and imposed on the subcommittee. And I have every reason to believe that this will be how it works in the future. And the initial structure of it was such that my fears would be brought out. They talked actually at one time about the policy board that the members of the agencies and the commissioners would be on would meet 4 times a year. And the basic day-to-day business would be done by the management board. Now, I think most of us understand how that works. 95% of the work is already done before it even gets to the desk of the county commissioner, and the county commissioner is basically going to just rubber stamp what happens. And this process is clear on that. If you, again, listen carefully to the minutes of the first advisory board meeting, 2 of the commissioners were all ready to go ahead. But clearly one of the commissioners hadn't read the document. Hadn't read the document, yet he wants to go ahead. The second commissioner, who was a lawyer, said, well, I scanned the document. So he briefly scanned the document, and he wants to go ahead. And again, listen to the 2-hour tape, and not one of the elected officials, save myself, asked one substantive question, yet they're willing to go ahead. I mean, when you get down to the practical reality of these things, you have to realize that often when commissioners go to some other locale for a committee meeting where they're not under the scrutiny of their taxpayers, they just haven't done the homework. And that's because they have busy schedules. I mean, I would say that every commissioner here, their first hours of the week are going to be spent reading their agenda and answering their constituents' questions. Lower on the list is reading the backup for what are often items unrelated to their work in their county. And that's exactly what happened during this process. I understand. Now may be the time to get more money for the lagoon. But I ask you, if you spent absolutely no time working out your financial systems, working out some system for financial accountability, of that $1 billion, how many hundreds of millions of dollars will be simply wasted? And I find that to be an abomination.
I'm good for now.
Okay.
Commissioner Solari, can you tell us how you really feel? I just wanted to compliment you on bringing in Silent Cal, our 30th president. He would be honored that you brought him along with your discussion. I see you have your debate hat on, and you're not going to get a debate from this side of the room, from this member. I will say that I believe that you identified the snake in the woodpile down to the species. And I do understand that we are committed to the lagoon. I think we're working harder, smarter, more effectively. We're working with the citizens. We're working with some doctors that have some great ideas. And I think that we're moving probably quicker than any other adjoining county as far as what we're looking at the lagoon. I don't think a day goes by without discussing the concerns for the lagoon and what we might do to ensure that we recover our lagoon back to where it needs to be. And I do share the same concerns. It sounds like the discussion was very similar to another committee and another group that was here trying to encapsulate us something with about seven something. There was a group that wanted to spend an awful lot of money planning the future for our citizens, when I think that we're doing the yeoman's job and in addressing the needs of the citizens. And I believe that we do have plenty more work to do with the lagoon, but it's happening, and I believe it's to create an innocuous environment that does not have any rules and regulations and is overfunded is not appropriate for this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And you did ask how I really felt. I just want to make it clear that I've understated my feelings and beliefs on this subject. I've understated them today. So if we had a chance to talk it privately, which we won't because of sunshine, but if any citizen wants to know how I really feel, see me when I'm off the dais.
But we've heard from Jason Brown, who was in attendance, as well as our general counsel, and I believe that their opinions are well noted as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Brien.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I serve on the 5-county Indian River Lagoon Counties Collaborative, and this first came to us apparently very soon after according to Bob's outline here, very soon after that initial first draft was submitted, and it was almost put to us as, okay, we need to sign this now, and this was the first time I'd ever seen this thing. And so from the very get-go, I've had a lot of similar concerns as what Commissioner Solari expressed. One of the things I have been hearing all along is we need to get this done because the legislature is now in session and we need to get funds. And the red flag that comes up to me is, well, what projects are they looking to fund? I mean, this group hasn't even been organized yet, so how could they have reviewed a list of projects to determine a ranking of projects to then go ask the legislature to fund? So in the back of my mind, just like Commissioner Solari explained, there was a hidden agenda at the beginning. I think there's a hidden project somewhere that everybody's lined up to fund, and it won't matter what this group says or ranks. It's going to go, and somebody's going to make an awful lot of money if this thing goes through. So I have big concerns, very similar to what Commissioner Solari expressed. One of the other things in that initial draft, it said this entity would have the authority and power to incur debt, issue bonds, taxes, all these powers that just scared the bejeebers out of me. And so in this latest draft, and I don't know, Dylan, if you and Kate have had a chance to look this over, but in the interlocal agreement that was presented to us to adopt, it does say that the Indian River Lagoon Council will not have the power to promulgate, issue, or make rules and regulations, issue bonds, levy taxes, charge rates, et cetera, except as specifically allowed by this agreement. So it kind of sounds like, okay, they won't be incurring debt and issuing bonds, but if you go back up to item G, under the specific powers of this entity, it does say that this entity can exercise all privileges, immunities, and exemptions accorded to parties individually under law. And that gives me concern because as an individual county, we do have the privilege to incur debt, issue bonds, levy taxes, and do all those things. And so I'm very much with Bob here. I'm very skeptical. And so when I read that, just red flags went off all over. So I'll ask Dylan to weigh in on that, if I'm overreacting to that, or is there a slippery loophole there?
To the Commissioner, I think this is one of those rules where in statutory construction, the specific overruns the general so that the specific phrase that they couldn't would dominate over the provision that they have the right to exercise all privileges, immunities, and exceptions. However, it is an ambiguity in the document. And as I've been told, Dylan, you will lose cases you should win, and win cases you should lose, and there's no reason for that ambiguity to be in the document.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Dylan. And then I guess my third thing would just be, Commissioner Solari, what is your recommendation for this board, for action this board should take? I know this came to the chairman, asked to be put on our agenda to adopt. Is it your recommendation we do not adopt it at this time, or?
Well, if I may, I'd like to weigh in while you're, because I'm going to ask you the same question. I just want to weigh in on my opinion on this, if that's okay. First of all, very, very seldom do I see an issue, I would say, that has the opportunity to have so many different opinions on for us to be so unanimous in our thought process on this. And I mean that in a very positive light. And I'm very, I can't tell you how comforting it is to have such a good group of individuals to sit around to take the considerations of something that clearly is so, I'm going to say, emotional to us all, being the health of our waterways, and to take a collective sigh and say, okay, let's look at this before we jump. And Commissioner Solari, I applaud you for looking into this in such a different level than I. My first reaction to this when I first heard about it simply was, I smelt a rat. Then I said that publicly, and I don't remember how long ago it's been. It's been back well before the several meetings ago. And I guess really the easiest way, since I don't have to try to it appears to convince any of my colleagues here, the easiest way to convey my point to the people of Indian River County is this. You have members of governing boards that are, and I'm going to say this with all as affectionately as I possibly can. They're employees of state and federal agencies. They are bureaucrats, and whenever I look at these employees of state and federal agencies, God bless them for the work they do. Their work's important, I'm sure, but the structure of this organization is made up of elected officials and state and federal and government employees. What does that mean? Well, to me that means if we join this organization in the fashion that it is right now, we are giving up the voice of the people of Indian River County if we agree to it. The way I see it is simply this. I know how to get rid of somebody that I disagree with that's elected to office. Each and every one of you know how to also. I implore upon you, how do you get rid of a bureaucrat if you disagree with them? I don't know how. More importantly, if a bureaucrat disagrees with the elected official that you put into office, how does that not counterbalance your voice of the commissioner that you elected in this community? To me, that is scary. To me, that is wrong. If they want to have an organization like this, make it of a representative from each individual county, and then I might consider it. But to give up 2 voices, willingly to bureaucrats defies logic to me. And I'll take it one step forward and take it out of the context of the issue of the lagoon. Let's put it in the context of all aboard Florida. It was a regional board that worked a lease agreement with a regional transportation authority that put the train to go from the FEC Railroad to the Orlando International Airport. I can tell you that as an elected official, if I were to do that, y'all would have my hide. But that was a regional board. I don't know of anybody here that voted for them. I don't know anybody in Orlando that voted for that regional board. But we're fixing to find out how bad that affects the quality of life right here in Indian River County. And it's also sandwiched in with another regional board to the south, all under the guise of regionalism. And I can tell you that between the toes of the regionalism of the Orlando Transportation Authority and the South Florida Regional Planning Councils, in between their toes is the Treasure Coast that's getting stepped on in the process. The more I look into this regionalism, the more skeptical I become. And it's not that I looked into it and had a 7-page document that I applaud you for putting together, Commissioner. But just look at this take the idea of the lagoon away from what we're looking at here. And I can tell you, I feel like this is going to be bad for local control. It's giving up our voice. It's going to be bad for local control because what we believe and stand for very well may differ than what other communities believe in and stand for. And that's put it about as mildly as I possibly can. So with that, Commissioner Solari, I'll ask you to answer the question that Commissioner O'Brien asked.
I will, and in fact, I thought that this question would go to next week, but I'd be happy to respond to it today. But before I start, I'll note that at the collaborative meeting that Commissioner O'Brien was at, one of the commissioners who's also on the design team working on this actually said that control will be centralized. Listen to the tape, and he said control will be centralized, and I agree with that. The idea that you're going to get more local control is a fantasy. So I believe that the proposed interlocal agreement for the new IRL NEP can be saved, not that it can easily be all that it could have been had it been an open and transparent process with all involved doing the type of roll-up-your-sleeves work that it deserves, but it can be saved. It can be saved with 2 substantial changes. First, a meaningful sunset clause. A sunset clause where, in 5 years, renewal comes back to each of the 5 county commissions, where, as part of an open and transparent process, the IRL NEP has to show what it has done in the past 5 years and what it will do in the next 5 years. And I'll note that at the first subcommittee meeting, the 3 elected officials all agreed to this paragraph. And then staff subsequently totally changed it and watered it down to some milquetoast meaningful paragraph. This meaningful sunshine clause should be in the agreement because citizens along the lagoon deserve it. They deserve to know, as part of an open and transparent process, how and why their money is being spent. Second, the voting parties need to be limited to the elected officials of the 5 counties. The regulatory bodies can stay on as parties, but the voting parties should be representatives elected by the people. Those who regulate us do not need a further vote on how we implement their regulations. In fact, the proposed interlocal dictates an absurd outcome. The agents who regulate us will be allowed to decide on and vote on projects which are to be moved forward, and the same agencies will be required to permit those projects. I mean, if you put it in simple constitutional terms, the U.S. Constitution has a separation of powers. This totally ignores that concept. We do not need to strengthen the administrative state. Those unelected agencies who control more and more of our American government and which do so outside of the public eye, too often with no public input and too often with no accountability, do not need to be given any more power. On the new IRL NEP, we need voting members who are elected representatives because that strengthens our representative democracy. Our responsibility to the people we represent is not to weaken the office in which we serve, but rather to strengthen the people's representative democracy. Unfortunately, more and more today, elected officials are not responsible to the people who elect us, but to the administrators who regulate us. And you watch this happen all the time. More and more regulatory bodies come on and tell the elected officials what they need to do, and we more and more, not this commission thankfully, but more and more elected bodies take their focus off of the people who put them into the office and put it to the regulatory bodies. I believe that we must save the lagoon, but in order to save the lagoon, we do not need to weaken our representative democracy. We can both save the lagoon and strengthen our form of government. It will take more work, but I believe that we are elected to do that work and should not hesitate in fulfilling our obligations to those who have put us in office. That's my response to Commissioner O'Brien's.
It's pretty good.
Thank you.
I agree with that. I should have let you just speak first.
I have another question. Dylan, when the entity having the ability to raise funds or issue bonds, can you go back over that answer you gave again? Would they have the ability to do that in the second provision that was...
Sure, to Commissioner Zork. I don't think that they would have the authority to issue bonds, levy taxes, and charges, because this is a very specific provision versus the very general provision outlined in G above. With that being said, it's an ambiguity in the document. And I'm giving you my legal opinion based upon how statutory construction rules work, but that doesn't mean a judge or someone else may not rule accordingly.
Because what I could envision is almost like with the, not bringing in City of Vero Beach Electric, but the ARP project where you get an entity borrows a lot of money and then makes members responsible for that share of the money without any benefit. I wouldn't want to see, just use Brevard County for an example, say we're going to do a $300 million project and this entity is going to guarantee it, which would also be us. If somebody took the opinion that they could do it, an opposite one of what yours is, and an opinion is, if you ask 5 attorneys in the room, you'll probably get 3 that'll say one thing and 2 that'll say something else, potentially. That would be a big concern. Also, if you did put a sunset provision in, I think if somebody's looking at bond guarantees, if the entity only has a 5-year window to be reviewed, how far out could they borrow? Would they have to have their debt satisfied within the period before it would sunset? So they couldn't go out and leverage 30 years, then 5 years it might disband, and then you're on the hook for another 25 years after that. Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, not a question. I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that we direct Dylan and Bob to draft a letter for your signature going back to the St. John's Water Management District, and kind of a polite thank you, but no thanks. And then I recommend the 2 points Commissioner Solari brought up, the wording to deal with the 5-year sunset clause and the wording to deal that only voting parties, only elected officials are the voting parties.
Just real quick, and I got a motion from Commissioner O'Brien with a second from Commissioner Flesher on that, and my question would be to Commissioner Solari. In the event those 2 changes are made, would that be sufficient enough to gather your support for the program?
Well, I believe that Dylan needs to have an analysis of the final draft also, in case there's something else. I'll note that despite the fact that FDEP wanted to rush this through as fast as possible, that at the meeting where we were going through this paragraph by paragraph, the December 17th meeting of the advisory board meeting, FDEP, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, came with about 15 technical changes. And quite frankly, I could not tell you how those technical changes, which were done paragraph by paragraph through a period of about an hour and a half, would impact the document in its entirety. Something like that, I need to read the whole document 2 or 3 times and I might get it. So I'm not going to pretend that I understood what was going on. And at that point, quite frankly, I wasn't.
But you have the feeling that those changes that they made...
they must have meant something to something. And of course, given now that they're all supplied at the last moment by the regulatory agency, I can't think that they would do anything but help the regulatory agency accomplish its objectives, not help the local governments accomplish their objectives. So I would certainly want to have Dylan have a careful reading of that agreement to see if he picks up something that I didn't.
And my motion would certainly include that, and maybe worded that doesn't say if you do these 2 things we're in. It would just allow us further consideration of the document.
I feel good with that.
Without committing ourselves to sign it.
All right. And is there anybody from the public that wishes to weigh in on this before we take a vote on Commissioner O'Brien's motion? Mr. Smith, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As your clerk and comptroller, one of my duties is also internal audit, and I would be willing to volunteer my services as far as contacting my counterparts in the other 5 counties to get some financial, see if we can put some pressure to get the financial information that Commissioner Solari is seeking. I know Jason has a good rapport with his counterparts, so we could work together. I'm just offering my services in that regard. If you,
Jeff, I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great idea. And Commissioner, if you would mind putting that into your motion too, and Commissioner Flesher, will your second, to have to ask our clerk to solicit the services of other clerks of circuit court for these other commissions that are going to jump off into this. Let them. I thank you. We'll add that to it. Is there any further discussion or any further comments from the public? Seeing none, all those in favor of Commissioner O'Brien's motion signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. That motion passes unanimously. That takes care of that item. Thank you very much, Commissioner Solari.
Aye. Thank you, one and all, for your patience.
Absolutely. That moves us to that concludes our proclamations and presentations, and now moves us to the information items. Is there anything that on the information item? We'll move now to the consent agenda. Commissioner, what is your pleasure on the consent agenda?
Move as posted.
I've got a motion from Commissioner Flesher with a second from Commissioner O'Brien to approve the consent agenda as presented. Is there anybody that wishes to have anything pulled for consideration from the consent agenda? Anybody wish to discuss any item on the consent agenda before the approval? Seeing none, Commissioners, all those in favor of the consent agenda signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Now we move to the public hearing items, and I'll turn it over to Stan, and then at that point I will probably, gentlemen, actually what we'll do while Stan's getting ready, I'll go ahead and read what this is, and then we'll go through the confession process. For the benefit of the public, we're fixing to have a public hearing here. This is of the Full Gospel Assembly Incorporated of Vero Beach's request for special exception use approval for a fellowship hall addition. What happens in the process up here, as some of the things that we do as county commissioners, we have two different actions that we can take. One of them is a quasi-judicial action, which is the ones that's before us, which basically means that we act more more like a judge, and we have parameters and framework rules that are put in front of us, and we have the opportunity to make a judgment call. And in that process, in the judgment call process, we want to ensure that we all have open minds and that we have not had ex parte communications with any of the parties, and if we have, that we can still have the opportunity to keep an open mind. So I'm going to go through the quasi-judicial question form for agenda item 10A, and that is the request for Full Gospel Assembly, Inc. of Vero Beach for special acceptance use approval for a fellowship hall addition. Now, of course, this is a quasi-judicial proceedings. The parties to the proceedings are Indian River County and Full Gospel Assembly, Inc. of Vero Beach. And at this time, I will ask the Commissioners to disclose any ex parte communications, site visits, or independent investigations that they may have had. Commissioner Solari?
I have none, sir.
Commissioner Zort?
I have none.
I talked to somebody here that's here to speak about it. Just told him he was in the right spot, so that's about it. Commissioner O'Brien?
None.
Commissioner Flesher?
Mr. Chairman, I did have the occasion to pass the site. I did not analyze the application, and I did have the opportunity to inquire with Stan Bowling the nature of the application. At no time did we discuss the merits of the application. That was not my intention, nor was it expressed by Stan Bowling, and he is here present to affirm. Thank you.
Okay. And Commissioners, can you confirm that you will be able to have an open mind and are able to base your decision on the evidence presented and applicable law? Commissioner Solari?
I can.
Commissioner Zort?
I can.
Commissioner Davis will. Commissioner O'Brien?
I can.
And Commissioner Flesher?
I do and will.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of correction. I am familiar with the site over the years just from it being a long-standing building in the community, and I have driven past it, but not anything related specifically to this application.
Very well. Okay, that concludes, I think, the formalities with one exception after we open the public hearing. So I will go ahead and at this time, I will open the public hearing and call on our clerk, Ms. Maureen Gelfo, to anybody that wants to speak on this issue. You will be asked to be under oath. If you would, raise your right hand and be sworn in by the clerk if you wish to speak.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. At this time, I will turn this over to Stan Bowling, our Community Development Director. Stan, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request for special exception use approval. Because it's a special exception, this hearing is being conducted this morning. The special exception use process involves review of a site plan at the staff level, and there are specific criteria for a particular use, in this case a place of worship and a proposed building that's accessory to a place of worship. There are compatibility criteria and 2 public hearings. So this application has already been reviewed at a public hearing by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and this is the final public hearing before the board. And essentially the board is to either approve the request with conditions, or deny the request. This is a location map of the subject site, which is shaded in gray. This is located south of Oslo Road on the west side of Old Dixie Highway, here on the right-hand side of the image. The site is a little over 1/2 of an acre. It's part of the Dixie Heights subdivision. It's made up of a number of lots together. It is zoned single-family, residential single-family, up to 6 units per acre, located along a collector roadway, Old Dixie Highway. To the east of Old Dixie Highway is heavy commercial uses, and then the FEC railroad tracks. So it is an appropriate location that qualifies as a special exception for a church in a single-family zoning district. And, of course, actually the vast majority of churches in the county are special exception uses in single-family and multifamily zoning districts. This particular site has single-family residential uses surrounding it on 3 sides. You can see the individual lots for the Dixie Heights subdivision. 13th Street Southwest is a local street in this particular location, and 13th Place Southwest is also a local street in this particular location. This is an aerial of the site. The red line is the approximate property lines, although I think the property line actually goes a little bit further south here on the south end of the property. Again, north is to the top. You can see Old Dixie Highway, some heavy commercial uses, contractors, trades, and warehousing, storage off on the east side of Old Dixie, and then single-family residential lots surrounding the property. Again, the street to the north is a local street. The street to the south is a local street as well. And I will point out that this existing sanctuary building has been there for quite some time. It was built in 1958. In terms of the setbacks, it's actually between 17 and 20 feet from the actual property line. And there are some grandfathered in, stabilized, grassed spaces that have been used for many, many years by the church. And those particular spaces don't conform to our existing code. Our existing code is to have off-street spaces. But again, these are grandfathered in. This is an existing church. Most of the building itself is a sanctuary area, and the proposal is to put a fellowship hall addition, a building, essentially on the north side here. And I'll show you the site plan in a few moments. With respect to the existing grounds of the site, there is stabilized grassed area for parking and for a driveway that goes through the site here to the north. Again, there's no formal parking stops, parking spaces organized on the site, but the site is used for parking and driveway area. Currently, there is an existing shed and some other structures that will be removed if the project is approved and if it moves forward. I do want to mention, while I have the aerial up, at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, there were residents that had concerns and objections to the project. This is the residence of Mr. Crow, who lives across the street, and I think he's here to speak this morning. He spoke at the Planning and Zoning Commission as well. And Mr. Troska owns this home here to the west of the subject site. He was at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and I believe he's also here to speak this morning. Yesterday, staff got an email from the owner of Ms. McCrary of this residence here, and some of the concerns that she expressed, concerns about potential adverse impacts from the proposed project on property values, privacy, safety, and some nuisance concerns, although she was not at the Planning and Zoning Commission and indicated that she would not be here this morning for this particular hearing. So again, with the aerial up, I did want to just show that the existing driveway off of 13th Place Southwest for the church. It's not paved. It's very close to the property line here, kind of snakes through the property and goes out here on 13th Street Southwest, and the existing space is here. Also wanted to show, while the aerial is up, the existing entrance to the sanctuary building is here, and also here along Old Dixie. However, this really is basically the main entrance to the church, because the spaces that are used most are right here off of 13th Place Southwest, and this is the entrance. So there's a lot of entering and exiting that happens in that particular location. This is an image of the site plan. I apologize. To the north now is to your right, and south is to the left. Old Dixie Highway down here toward the bottom. This is the existing church and those parking spaces that are used along 13th Place Southwest. The proposed addition is highlighted in yellow to be used for fellowship hall. It could also be used for classrooms. It's essentially non-sanctuary space. The proposal would formalize with parking stops and appropriate dimensions and spaces the parking spaces on the site to meet our minimum parking requirement. Our minimum parking requirement, like many for places of assembly and churches, is based on the number of sanctuary seats, one space for every 3 seats, and that's the case here. Including the non-conforming existing parking spaces, they're right at our minimum requirement. As you can tell from this image, there are a couple of improvements that are concreted. The driveway aprons are proposed here at 13th Place Southwest. It's not concrete now. It would be with this project, and the exiting apron would also be concreted. The existing driveway is closer to this property line that abuts 2 residences, and it would be pulled a bit to the east, but be a one-way drive through this particular area. There are, again, existing entrances to the existing sanctuary building, but new entrances are proposed as well with the proposed addition, and that would be convenient to the proposed handicap space, which would be concreted here, and several parking spaces in this particular area. Proposed stormwater management tract is here, which will be grassed as well. So there will be some new entrances proposed with this project. Staff feels that might have some benefit in terms of the convenience of parking spaces that get used that are near entrances that could be used by persons using the facility. Again, the traffic circulation would be a one-way drive going from south to north, accessing spaces that are stabilized but grassed and formalized with parking stops. In terms of the landscape plan, there's buffering that is proposed. An existing large oak tree will remain in this particular location, but new plantings, oaks, large wax myrtles, and a 6-foot wooden fence along this particular area, so there will be a buffer provided where there is none now, with the exception of the existing tree. Also, landscape buffers along the proposed roadways with native vegetation, hollies, some sable palm, some relocated palms, as well as native shrubs in those areas indicated. Also, because this site is made up of a number of lots, back when the Dixie Heights plat was recorded years ago, there are some easements that still remain because of the plat in this particular location. They don't serve a purpose, and staff believes there will be no problem with those easements being released, but they do need to be released before this project would go to construction, and that's why there's a condition recommended for the applicant to obtain release prior to going to construction. The Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed this application at their meeting of September 25th, and they voted 5-0 to recommend that the board approve the special exception use with conditions recommended by staff. At the meeting, the concerns expressed by the neighbors, Mr. Crow and Mr. Troska, they're valid concerns about parking, the ability to handle parking, and some of the noise from the activities conducted on site. And that was actually the first time, I believe, that representatives of the church had heard those concerns, as well as staff. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission asked staff to host a meeting between the church representatives and the property owners before coming before you all this morning. And we were able to do that, to try to address concerns of the neighbors. And I'll go back to this site diagram. At the At the meeting that was held with the applicant and church representatives and the neighbors, again, they'd be the neighbors, Mr. Crow, Mr. Troska, here and here, the church, after the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, did make some changes to how they position and use their sound equipment to try to keep sound from basically inside the building being directed toward the residents here to the south. That seemed to have some positive effect. There's also concerns expressed at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Was there a way to redesign the project for the church to not have to use these 10 grandfathered-in parking spaces? And even though it was mentioned at the Planning and Zoning Commission, it'd be really difficult to try to redesign, within the right-of-way to have a parallel driveway. Again, the project engineer did take a look at what kind of redesign could be done to move these spaces, and there really is no way, because of the size of the site and its location, to provide all 21 parking spaces without using this and to allow for any meaningful addition to the church. But that was an alternative. Those were alternatives that the project engineer did explore and went over with staff, and those were mentioned at the joint meeting held in October with the surrounding property owners. At the conclusion of the meeting that was held on October 31st, there was discussion about parking and traffic and noise levels. Also, an aesthetic appearance concern did come up, and there was some discussion of that. I think the neighbors, and they can certainly speak for themselves here, I think the bottom line is they believe that the parking demand and the size of the site, they really didn't see a way for being able to support further development on the site, and that's basically their position. The church, since the October 31st meeting, did agree to try to address some of the aesthetic concerns if the project is approved and it moves forward, to have the color of the addition match the color of the existing building, and to have some foundation plantings added to their landscape plan along the west side of the proposed addition to kind of soften the appearance a bit from that side. So those are conditions that have been agreed to by the applicant. Staff's recommendation is that the board grant special exception approval with the conditions outlined in our report. That includes releasing the easements that go through the middle of the site to provide the landscaping and buffer improvements that are shown, and to have a condition that the new building color match the existing building, and to provide the foundation plantings for the addition that would need to be reflected on the final landscape plan. Be glad to answer any questions that you all might have.
Commissioners, any questions to staff?
I have one.
Yes.
And how is the proposed, is this a sewer site or septic site?
Yeah, this site is not a sewer site, and I think I can't tell you where the sewer locations are for this particular item. It has the existing septic system, and this was reviewed by utilities staff to see if it met a requirement to hook up, if they were close enough, and it was determined that they weren't. But I couldn't tell you the distances they are.
Any other questions to staff?
None right now.
All right. Okay. At this time, is there any, will we have a presentation from the church at this time? Mr. Mosby, welcome. And you don't have to, just if you want to, and then we'll just have comments and questions back and forth.
Okay.
Public.
I got something new that I think you need to relate to. My name is Randy Mosby. It's been a long time since I've been here. Good morning. I represent the Full Gospel Church. I have with me, it looks like most of the church members and the pastor, Gene Bissett. This has been a long haul. The staff has really done a detailed job in reviewing our site plan on this project. One thing came up yesterday because there were still some concerns about overflow parking. The church sometimes has special events. They get more cars there than that are spaces available. I reached an agreement yesterday with Tim Rose Construction, who has a building across the street, to go into a written agreement to give them spaces for overflow if they have church, a Christmas party or some kind of special event where they need more parking. So we've been able to resolve that. That came about yesterday. I don't have the written agreement to give you today, but we can get that. And so, I'm here to answer any technical questions you have on the site plan, but I think we've done more than our share of getting this thing approved through here for special exception.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Randy, is that parking across Old Dixie going east? Or?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's on the other side. It's in the industrial park.
Right. Okay.
Tim Rose Construction.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Randy, how many spots do you think can be allotted with the additional memorandum?
From Tim?
Yes.
I think Tim has about 15 spots over there in the front of his building.
I could just from staff's viewpoint, I believe they have 18 spaces on that
18.
front Old Dixie Highway, and the site's about 250 feet to the southeast.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. All right. Yes, sir.
Randy, one more thing. If this goes through and you do sign the agreement with the overflow parking, would the church? I think a little concerned about them crossing Old Dixie. So would the applicant be willing to pay for just paint a crosswalk there, or something to give a little warning for pedestrians?
I would think so. Did you understand that, Pastor?
Yes, the church has a...
Come on up.
If you'd just come on up,
Yeah,
please.
only because in order for this to be heard, and the recording and everything.
And just, Pastor, my concern is if you're going to use the overflow parking on the east side of Old Dixie, that can be a pretty busy road, and it's just one lane each way. So if we approve this, one of the conditions might be that the church would pay to paint some, or whatever the Public Works Department recommends, some type of a crosswalk, just so the motorists have a little heads up that there might be pedestrians crossing there.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, I don't know.
You're the chairman.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Yeah, had it. Sorry about that. I'm new at this. Before you commit to that, it's not going to be a lot of money, but I tell you what, our Public Works Director, I don't know if Chris is listening. If he could come on down from wherever he is, he recently did some of this up at Shiloh Youth Ranch, and so it'll give you an idea of I don't. What's that?
He's gone.
Well, he'll be back.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I ask a question while we're waiting for Chris?
Sure.
Pastor, when do you generally have your events? What day of the week?
Once a year. It's not so
No, but what day of the week?
When you have your services.
Sunday morning.
Okay, I'm
Sunday
just wondering if, my guess is that not only our service is Sunday morning, but his special events may be on Sunday. So Old Dixie is pretty quiet at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wonder if it's even necessary. If it were during the week, I'd agree with Commissioner O'Brien, but if it's during the Sundays, I wouldn't even say it would be worth the paint.
Okay. All right. And I see Chris coming down. Chris, just I don't know if you're following the conversation or not, but there's been some comments as far as some pedestrian signaling signage and striping. And Commissioner O'Brien has asked if they'd be willing to shoulder that. In general, what would be a anticipated price of doing such improvements?
Well, I think what we're speaking about is a standalone pedestrian crosswalk, markings on the pavement, along with some yellow and black warning signs, pedestrian warning signs. We're talking probably less than $500 for the entire installation.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Any other? Yes, Commissioner Zort.
And I kind of echo that as a kind of as a liability item. There was recently a church, I think in Palm Beach, that had a pedestrian striping issue in the parking lot, and somebody was struck by a vehicle, and it actually went back to it shouldn't have been approved without some signage or striping. So even though it may be additional expense, it's probably a good proactive item to. I don't like adding things to people, but after reading how that entity was held responsible due to a parking striping question, and they had to pay a large sum of money from that as well. Okay. So, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? All right. Yes, ma'am. Welcome.
Welcome. My name is Veronique Barletier, one of the parishioners at the church. You asked the question, how often do we have the event and what day? And he mentioned Sunday, and I just wanted to correct that. Many times it would be Saturday. instead of Sunday, because Sunday we'll have our regular services, and that would happen maybe every twice a year.
Right. Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you.
Those are the special events,
Those are special events.
Yeah, that's what Commissioner Brown's question was.
not normal services.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you very much. At this time, is there anybody from the surrounding property owners that would like to be heard? If you would, just give your name and address for the record, if you would, so we can keep it. And welcome.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Crow. I live at 209 13th Place Southwest. I guess the hot topic right now is the extra parking. Across the street is a gated storage facility. I'm not exactly sure where they're pulling 15 spots. I mean, even along the road, I don't know where they're planning on parking. So I guess that really needs to be defined as far as where and how those spots are going to work, if they're going to work. I guess that's the first question. Overall, our issue with the church is their overall presence in the community. They are there Sunday mornings from 10:30 to 1:30, Sunday evening from 7:30 to 9:30. They are there Wednesday from 7:30 to 9:30. Again on Friday. There's special events that do hold on Saturdays. Also at the October 31st meeting, they mentioned with the addition of this building, they look forward to having weddings and banquets and other gatherings for the church there. In the original P&Z meeting that they had, they said this is just going to be a Sunday school used for Sunday only. The church meets a lot more, and to build a building that's bigger than their current building, to use it one morning a week, it seems far-fetched. I mean, even their current building is like 2,500 square feet. This one's almost 3,000, 2,900 square feet. They're proposing they're not going to put a single chair in that building. Currently, as their building sits, it holds a lot of people. I've seen people come in there, even their own engineer has witnessed when they brought people in by charter bus. They also have a smaller community coach style bus that will bring people in, and that building holds a lot of people. Recently, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, they had an event there, and there was upwards to, I think, 28 cars there, and by your guys' math, 3 seats for every car. That's 84 seats. Like I said, there's a lot of people in there, and I've asked at both meetings, the second one for sure, what is the capacity of that building? How many seats do they have in there now? I know they said they have pews, but every pew is some sort of, this is a 5-person pew, this is a 10-person pew, this is a 20-person pew. There's never been an answer of actually how many seats are in the sanctuary currently as the building sits today. And with reference to the parking, there is actually 20 parking bumpers on site right now along the back. You could vaguely see it in the overhead, but I printed up a zoomed on where it shows all the parking bumpers. So they already have a defined, almost assigned parking, if you will, let alone adding those 10 spots across the front of the church that are grandfathered in. They have almost upwards of 30 spots that are available to them, plus that entire field that they're talking about, adding their addition to that they don't use. A bulk of the parking is done to the south side, and a very haphazard, come as you will way. I have some video, a lot of it. I've kind of clipped it down, worked, like Mr. Solari said, worked many hours of clipping it down to present to you guys if you'd watch it. On the original September 25th meeting, they said they weren't unaware of our issues with their, salutations outside, with them honking towards each other as they're leaving, and, they said the children are out there and they can't control the children, so, we just kind of have to deal with it. That was on September 25th. This is the video that here is from November 29th, I believe, the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And you can see how when they exit, hopefully in here, I did catch a timestamp. It was at 10:30 at night.
10:23. So as you see, after we already expressed our concerns, they still refuse to, to the community that they came into, that they say they respect and they, want to, conform to, or, they just don't. There's a lot going on over there when they do have these events. Even it puts everybody who's pulling out on that road at danger, because the way they parked that evening, there was one truck all the way parked right up to Old Dixie. So when you were pulling out, there's a picture there. When you pull out of Old Dixie, you cannot see to your north. So all the oncoming traffic was blocked by a truck that was parked out there. There is another video here that shows there was actually 27 cars there that night, and the style in which they were parked. They have, like I said, they have 30 spots to find. Or excuse me, they have 20 defined with parking bumpers. They have the 10 overflow, and then they have that whole field, which
in the 4 years that they've been there, they've used that field once. And that was the night after the initial P&Z meeting, and then they had their meeting with the engineer who said, let's try to use it the way it's going to be designed. Now a lot of parking does happen on the back side of the church, but that's 10 spots that they use that are going to be switched to only 4 spots. So that's only going to bring, they all park close to the main entrance, which is that side entrance, which is just going to overflow that south side parking lot.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Turning the corner. There's 11 and 12 up on the hill. 13 and 14. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27, blocking your view of pulling out on Old Dixie.
Since September, at the meeting, I've paid attention to the cars that come and go. There's 42 cars that come there. I know they all don't show up at once, but since September till now, there's been 42 cars. There's pictures to back up every single car on here if they have any question, and they're all parked on their property. Also in the pictures, there is a better still shot of that photo of the car, blocking Old Dixie. I know they said, well, once you define some parking, it will alleviate your problems, but parking's already been defined. They put those parking stops there for, I think, back in 2011 when they did some interior modifications to the building. It's just a large inconvenience. There's been other churches there that, operate quietly. They come and go. They use the other side to park. It wasn't an issue. There's a lot of use to this building, and still, I think one of my biggest hang-ups is you're building another building and not putting a chair in it. They're motivated people. They're a church. They're supposed to grow. What stops them once they have that building moving from the one building to the next? Because they can fit 100 seats in there. They could fit, it's a 38 by 39 building. How many seats could fit in there? I know they don't have them to put in there today, but once the building there, it's there. You guys aren't going to walk in there and be like, well, you have to tear the building down. Unless maybe that does happen, I don't know. There's just a lot of questions that brings into doubt.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Crow expressed some ambiguity as far as there was numbers of occupancy, and I believe that we can just ask our fire prevention team, and they'll let us know what the occupancy is for the building at this time, or could be. Correct?
Yeah, I imagine they have an occupancy based on the number of square footage is how they determine the occupancy.
It's a commercial establishment, so I don't believe there would be ambiguity if we...
Right. Like I said, I've asked before and I've never got an answer, and I know they're going to be close to 6,000 square feet now. There has to be some sort of... that's like me opening up a restaurant and putting 100 seats in there and be like, well, I only have parking for 75, I'm just going to rope this off and not use it. I can't put seats that I don't have parking for.
Mr. Bowling, do we have a current occupation
I think the
occupancy number?
Not a building code occupancy number, but in the application and on the site plan, they state that there are 63 seats in the sanctuary area, and that's what the 21 spaces is based on.
And that's 20 normal parking spots and 1 handicap? So that's really...
That's correct. That is what the site plan shows, 20 non-handicap spaces and 1 handicap space.
You can't bank there's always going to be a handicap person there to using... I know it's splitting hairs, but
Well, I think what it is more than splitting hairs. In that instance, what is existing there is grandfathered in. And so I think that the in looking at that, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of this particular issue you're on, anything that was there prior to, there's not a whole lot that government come in and make them rework.
I understand that, but my point is when you're adding on and covering up a large portion of your land of parking that they need, they do. They're a church since they've moved there, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, they've grown. Mm-hmm. I mean, they came out of a building that was 1,400 square feet with 14 spots and one handicap spot, and now they're into this building, which is 2,400 square feet, and they're adding 2,900 square feet. And like I said, they're motivated people. When they first got there, they pulled permits, did a bunch of demolition on the inside. They removed lots of rock. Their truck got stuck. I helped them out. No big deal. But like I said, churches grow. I know my church does. They add services. They figure it out. When we have big events, we have to rent out another hall. They're building their hall. That's great, but like I said, there's nothing that's going to stop them from moving from one building to the other because we have more members, and that's the goal of any church.
Stan, you got any response to that?
Well, again, our parking requirements are based on sanctuary seats. You can certainly have other uses going on in the church. There could be nursery activities or things like that, but it is based up. The idea is that you've got one car for 3 of the seats in the sanctuary, and that drives the peak parking demand. But certainly, special events or special services can require overflow parking. I think many churches in this area and many other areas have arrangements for overflow parking, and that's actually pretty customary, I think, for some of the special events.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Right. Yes, ma'am.
Just to answer Mr. Crow's a few statements that he's made, I want to address them.
What was your name again? I'm sorry.
My name is Veronique Barletier.
And Veronique, you were sworn in?
Yes, I was.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
Okay. Just to address Mr. Crow's many concerns, and we've addressed them in last 2 meetings. But Mr. Crow is using this one event that we had, but if he calculates and goes back, and just like the gentleman says that church do have events, we are in the business of souls to add more souls to the sanctuary, as he mentioned. He goes to his church. But at the same time, on our night of event, we don't hold it against him. He used our parking lot, but it seems like it's more of an issue with him. We went across the street, since it's now a concern for him that we use the parking lot. Before, we didn't have the gentleman's permission to use his parking lot. Out of respect, we didn't do that. We will address it from this point on. But it seems like Mr. Crow has other concerns. It seems like, I think he's just nitpicking, to use the correct term, in the fact that, first of all, he videotaped us without our permission. That's a privacy issue. Ms. Query says there's been issues of safety. In all this time that we've been on the property, there was never a safety issue. We've never had an incident, nor at Mr. Crow's property or any property around us. We're not uncivilized people. The last time when in our last meeting, however we offered Mr. Crow that we were willing to adjust, it was not satisfying to him. So it seems like all that he's bringing up now that we've got the permission from Tim to use his parking lot, he's saying he doesn't know how to use the parking. If we get undercoded with the city, I think that should be suffice. Every church at this time, everybody is going through stuff. They need a place to go. And if our Haitian community is the place that our church is, the Haitian community, that they can come and find this refuge, I find Mr. Crow, he's telling me that he too is a church member. What is the fuss? Just like I addressed to him last time, here's this building here, and you guys said you're going to situate this building, and every once in a while you will redesign the building to make it more customable. So Mr. Crow has a problem with us inside our building. That's not going to affect him outside the building. He's complaining about the addition on our building, it's going to be on the other side, on the opposite side of Mr. Crow. So how is it a problem for Mr. Crow?
Stan, what the fellowship hall impact fees versus the sanctuary impact fees, are they the same?
All right, impact fees are based on square footage.
Are they the same use?
Yes, correct. Okay. That's correct. It's separate from parking.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, Commissioner? Anybody else? Yes, sir. Please come up.
May I stand here?
Sure, absolutely. Consider it a privilege.
Thank you.
My name is David Troska. I own a property at 218 13th Place Southwest. Could you put that one picture back up there where you had the allotted parking spots and the new driveway and all, please?
That's the biggest problem I ever had was the churches.
It was that one there. But you actually had one that showed the parking spots, not shaded in. Yeah, that one, please. Okay, and I just have one question because I was unable to see this from back there, and then I'll proceed with what I have. You did say this was going to be on sewer, correct, or on septic?
That's correct. I think it is correct.
Looking at the parking, the new concrete parking and the retention ponds and all that, where would that septic be located?
Right. I'm not sure where the existing septic system is. I think it's out toward Old Dixie, but I think the project engineer.
I'm just saying I don't think you're going to be able to put the septic in the retention. You're not going to be able to put it underneath the buildings.
Certainly not. But
and
again,
you're not going to be
I
able to put it underneath the driveway.
Do you want to know where the septic is?
Yeah,
All right,
I would
hold
like
on one
to know.
second. Mr. Mosby, do you know where the septic is?
Yes, I met with I met with the health department. Septic tank's located to the east of the existing sanctuary. We've had Reliable go out and open it up, check it all out, and so it's been approved for the seating that we have in the chapel. And it's been existing for quite a few years.
Okay, the seating for the chapel, and I'm assuming there would have to be some kind of a code for the fellowship hall. I mean, with that expansion.
The flows to the septic tank are based on the seating in the seating in the church. See, when you have a fellowship hall, the people that use the sanctuary go to the fellowship hall at different times from the church services.
Okay.
This is right on the sand ridge.
Sure.
You can't even drop a glass of water out there and have it stand. That retention area is going to be dry completely. The drain field's been working for many years real well, and that soils that we have out there. So we've gone through all that work of digging it up, making sure it'll still go with it, and health department signed off on it.
Okay. Is that the question where it is?
Well, yeah, kind of. But, just to answer that question, to answer that, or to rebuttal that question, I've owned that house there for several years, and the sand ridge, the septics do go bad. I mean, it don't change the fact that the drain field's clog and so forth. I mean, the ground that's existing might perk very well, but septics do go bad, and mine has had to been pumped several times over the years. You're looking at the picture now, and it's showing here, you can clearly see the property lines to, like, say, my house, which would be lot 12. You see the new future driveway. You see the radius of the new future driveways even going out past my property line, which might make it easy for the flow of them, but now you're directing traffic, in the county right away, but past my property line. In other words, most times when you put a driveway in, the flare has to stop, 5 foot short of the property line. They're showing it going past the property line. I mean, it all looks good on picture there, but it's going to impact the front of my house severely. The parking spots going down the side, as you see at 10 o'clock at night, a couple trees or whatever, or a fence right there, people parallel parking right there by the yard. I don't know, honking the horn. You can put up all the bushes you want. I'm just basically echoing Mr. Crow's sentiments. The church will grow. You're talking about they're going to park down at Tim Rose's. You've seen that video. You've seen how dark that was. You're talking about a crosswalk for them to get across. Tim Rose property is 250 feet to the south, which is on the south side of 13th Place. They're going to be walking down the side of Old Dixie in the middle of the night. at 10 o'clock, no street lighting, no nothing. I personally don't have a problem with church being there. I don't see where they've got the room to grow and not impact my life and a piece of property that I own. You're asking for a special exemption. I don't see it. I mean, that's just me personally. The parking spots that they have allowed on Old Dixie, granted they're grandfathered in, but back to the aspect of them walking 250 feet on the other side of a major road in the dark to get to their church. Who's to say Tim Rose don't sell that building in 5 years? Are you going to get a letter saying Tim Rose is keeping it for the rest of his life? Now you got him walking down inside Old Dixie in the dark, crossing the street. The parking spots are already intruding into the county right away. The ones that are grandfathered in, they're intruding into the county right away. No sidewalks, no nothing. It's going to be a problem for me. There's nothing they can do here to convince me that the church is not going to grow, it's not going to get bigger and bigger. If it's a small community church, I chose that lot because of a small community church, not a mega church. If you want a mega church, go somewhere where you have the land to expand for it. They do not have the room there. Not without impacting the neighborhood all the way around. Like I say, you can see the driveways clearly cut in front of other people's property. The traffic has to go past other people's houses. Walking down the street, no sidewalks, no lights. They themselves said they got to grow, and I don't have a problem with that in the right spot. Where are you going to put these people? They're already at maximum capability now with the building they have, filling them spots. And like I said, that picture looks real good, especially the way it crosses, 7, 8 feet in front of my property line on where they're backing out onto the road or pulling out onto the road or whatever they're going to do. I just don't see where you have the room, and that's pretty much all I can say. But if you own, they say, what's it to you if you had if you live there, it wouldn't matter to you. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just to address that, Stan, do you have the lighting plan for the lot?
Yeah, they have lighting around the church buildings that are proposed. They don't have they don't have formal street lights around the parking lot.
And would a parking lot of that size require box lighting or pole lighting?
No, not required.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioners? Anybody else? Yes, sir, Mr. Paladin, and then ma'am, you be next.
Joseph Paladin, President of Black Swan Consulting. Ladies and gentlemen, Commissioners, listen, I think a church in a community, a church in a neighborhood to start with is a good thing. It's a positive thing, and basically the way we built America. And I think the worst problem in our life is the church in our community expands because they got more people coming to their church. God bless America. I think that's great. This video that he showed, I don't think that's a every week Sunday affair. That's a special event. Am I right or am I wrong on that?
I don't know. Come on up. The public can't hear you.
It is. I mean, like you said, God bless America. Yeah, right. I mean, I agree with that. Sunday night, Wednesday night, Friday night, they're out there. They may not honk every single night, but they are out there laughing during dismissal when they say their salutations inside, and they go directly to the car. They do not. There is another 3-minute video if you want to watch another one on a normal night, but it is, again, laughing, jovial. They're happy people. Great. I'm happy when I walk out of church too. But at 9:30 at night, when my children are in bed, 8:30 and 9 o'clock, and I hear people, buddy, they're leaving. They're going to be gone in a couple minutes. The way their building is it's a flat brick wall, and they're loud, they're happy, they're joyous. When they're saying goodnight, when they're saying goodbye, when they're laughing about something, that sound echoes from their building right to my house, and in turn, by putting another building side by side, a metal building at that, it's going to go down that hallway between the houses and echo right through to the other neighbors. Like I said, I don't have a problem in the world with the church being there. I just want it to be organized and less intrusive onto my private time. I mean, it is. We were founded on religious beliefs, but we all have the freedom to choose what we want. And to have a overgrowing population, it doesn't work.
So having said that, that was just a typical night during the week at the church. It's not a special event. Is that what the gentleman said? I didn't really understand the answer.
That was the special event. There is another one.
All right. Thank you. You answered my question. Thank you.
If you would like to see that.
So anyway, this being a special event, it's sort of like we had a discussion several years ago about a church, building a church for Easter Sunday. Just doesn't cut it. Doesn't make any sense. You know, you have 51 other weeks out of the year. I think that's a poor example to use against trying to get a positive thing done. Again, expanding of a church, I think, is a positive thing. I think that more people wanting to go to church is, from what I've seen in America lately, I welcome that and I support that 100%. And I think if they've met the criterias and staff is satisfied with those criterias, I would urge you to approve this project. It's a positive thing in our neighborhoods. It's a positive thing in our community. And I think that everybody would work together a little bit more if we weren't so antagonistic, basically. Let's see what we can do to make it easier. Let's see what we make it do to be better for everybody. Everybody I've heard speak and everybody I've talked to, they're willing to cooperate. It's just the way you approach people sometimes. So I think if we sat down and worked as a community, worked as a team, worked as a neighborhood, I think we could probably solve some of these problems. But I think this is a good thing. I support Mr. Mosby and the pastor and the people here for this church, and I think you all ought to approve this and say it's a good thing. I support it 100%.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Welcome.
Hi. Good morning.
Morning. Name.
I'm Catherine Crow from 20913th with Mr. Crow.
Yes, ma'am.
As a resident of Indian River County, born and raised here, I just want to thank you gentlemen for your service, first off. The church, they complained at the P&Z meeting that we put stumps in our yard that they called barrels. We had to do so, my husband and I had to do so, because the church kept pulling into our yard when they would pull out of church and come across our driveway, which will eventually crack the driveway. To be non-confrontational and try to keep it nice, we put up, the stumps that we had cut down from the tree to kind of nicely say, please don't drive in the yard. They were there for 2 months. To me, they're unsightly. My husband was mowing the lawn. I'm like, okay, let's move it. They've got the hint from now. Please don't pull in the yard. As soon as we moved it, the next day, right back in the yard. We've tried to be considerate. Like my husband said, when the truck got stuck over there, when they were doing renovations, he went across to help. We don't have a problem with there being a church there. That's one of the reasons why we bought there. We're surrounded by woods. The woods and the lots around us are owned by families from the 70s, and if they didn't sell in the boom, they're not selling. So we're surrounded. And we figured, there's a tiny, small, quaint little community church across the street. That's going to guarantee good neighbors. This is a good place to raise our children, buy our first home. And there's been 2 churches that have functioned there since we've been there since 2006. And you've never known when they've shown up. You've never known when they've left. They've used the main entrance, not the side entrance of the church. They've parked on the other side or along the back, and they have used some of the grandfathered in spots. Since then, they didn't like the bumpers. The stumps are no longer there because that was a concern of theirs. They're gone. And, as you saw in the video towards the end, the gentleman pulled over on, the east side of our property, and the lady say, why? And he says, because I like driving over here. It's just they've not been very considerate over the fact that they are functioning in a neighborhood. There are families there with children that we're trying to put to sleep at 8:30, 9 o'clock for school on Monday morning. They don't like that we did fireworks. So come New Year's Eve, we did none. We usually do it in the middle of the road. They come out with the children from the church and watch. But that was a complaint at the P&Z meeting, if you want to talk about nitpicking. So New Year's Eve, we did none. Because out of consideration and trying to work together, if that's something that they don't want, we were very happy not to do it, if that's something that bothers them. The video, the reason why my husband have taken the time to even take the video is because the person who spoke for the church said, we don't do our salutations outside, we don't honk when we're leaving, and we can't control the children. Sir, I control my children when I'm in public and if it's going to affect other people. You can control your children. But there's just been no consideration to the neighbors that have voiced that they now do know our complaints. There was no changes made from the time that they heard our complaints at the P&Z meeting until now. You know, and I just feel that with them doubling in size, like my husband and I said, we have no problem with them wanting to grow the church. We ourselves take our sons and ourselves to church on Sunday and Thursday. I was born and raised into religion. I went all through school. I was at private school. I had to memorize Bible verses and go to church every weekend. I have nothing wrong with churches. Again, why we bought the house. There was a quaint little community church across the street. So it's not the church being there is not the problem. Them doubling in size and the consideration that they're giving the neighborhood around them, that's a problem. And I know that, you know, the woman that was a neighbor, a surrounding neighbor, sent in her letter of concern. There's a sheriff officer that's actually a sergeant for Indian River County that's highly opposed to this as well, who lives in the area where their letter is sent out for the meetings. Unfortunately, he had a class today, so he can't be here to speak. But he's lived there for a long time as well. I'm not going to list his name because I don't think that's very right. But he is greatly opposed as well. So, thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Yes, sir. Please come forward. Anybody else after that? If there is, we've got another podium up here if you'd like to speak, just to kind of move things along. Welcome. If you could give your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jacques Louis. I'm a deacon of the church. But and when I hear Mr. Crow talking like that and his wife add some more stuff, it don't make sense. And he tell us we back the car in the driveway. We never do that. They know that. We never do it. And on the 31st is the first time they don't do the firing. And on the 31st, when I come to the church, I come in first. They have 2 cars from the house parking on my parking lot, Southway. Got no place to come in. And when I look at that, I saw somebody, he not even want a church. It's something and the community have. And I think it's somebody who have another problem. And I know we make mistake. I know the video is show and we have a fellowship. They don't have even 160 people inside the church. 3 church. You don't have 160 people in the church that day. And it take time. The first thing you do, you take time, you take his video and check. And you go, he's trespassing. Go in the back of a yard. Sometimes he got this dog, boom in there. And this is that guy, he got another problem. And not for the church, not for the community. We love the community. I live in Palm Bay, I come to the church right here, 45 minutes. I got 10 years I come in this community. I never have a problem. We never have a problem with anybody. But you know, if we got another way to do it, do it. We can change. People can change. People can change. I pray for him every time I come to the church. I come. Because if you're a Christian, I think the church, I think all the church, I go to a big church, Calvary church. When you go outside, people talk. People say hi to each other. Because we're in the church, we don't see each other. We're together. But when you're outside, if I saw somebody, I have to give you a hand. God bless you. But I don't know, because he got another problem. Tell him we go to his parking lot, we never park any car across the street. And he know that. He know that. I'm sorry because I feel emotion, because you know the way his wife talking, we do this, we do that. We never go across the street. They do 4th of July, we never do anything. They do 31st, I know it's the time. And that day, sometime, come up with a Wednesday, it's a Sunday. You enjoy yourself. I went inside, enjoy myself with the Lord. But we never complain to anybody. You got people next door now, said, no, but he promised us he's going to help us to help when we do something. Now today, the story's changed. It's not fair. It's not fair. I'm sorry about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Just as you know, to address as rebuttal, I guess you would say, the only reason why we had some company over on New Year's Eve, it was after the stated time that church usually starts. It was after 8 o'clock. Nobody from the church was there. And our friends actually parked along the county easement, not pulled up into the church. So to us, it looked like there wasn't going to be any church that night. So for 2 cars that came over, they parked across the street from us on the county easement. And the reason why we didn't do fireworks on New Year's Eve is because we listened to their concerns and complaints at the P&Z meeting, so therefore we didn't do them out of consideration. We're not trying to nitpick and cross hairs here. Like I said, we were happy that the church is across the street, but it's over there more than just Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. Either Tuesday or Thursday, give or take, they have band practice. There's more going on than what they're saying is going on. And with them never coming into our yard, like I said, the stumps were unsightly. I didn't really want them there. I didn't put them there for no reason. And in the video it shows they did come into the yard, in the video. And the only reason why we took the video and took the time to do so was to disprove what they were saying at the P&Z meeting was not the truth. And as the community as a whole, as we've all shown up, and the ones that could not be here, we don't like the way they're conducting themselves in the neighborhood. It's not respectful.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Just to address a little bit of what Ms. Crow said, and we're going to leave it in your hands, commissioners, or the board to decide, and because this is like child play. He said this and we preferred this, and just to correct you a little bit, the way our parking is, your 2 cars were parking on the hill of our parking, so it wasn't parking on the city easement. But that's fine. We're not trying to nitpick that. We're not.
Veronique, no,
Yes.
it's not. You're under oath.
Yes.
And what I'm trying to do is just to hear the facts. And,
Yes.
And I, as far as whether they were parked on the right of way,
Let's leave that alone.
Please, material things is what we're talking about.
Right. And she mentioned, they mentioned about the fact that they have the little barrels that they've done there, and they put that, since the very beginning when we came to the church, they put that there. We understood what the reason why they put it there. They didn't want us to, cross over their parking. And just like Mr. Lewis said, we've respect their property and also the property on our backside. We've never gone over there. We've never crossed over there to enter into their parking lot. The only concern that I have when he was showing the video on there was the only thing that I thought that he would point out was fact there was one car that turned and shine the light on his window, because that was his concern, his very concern last time. But on our last meeting, many of the things that they've mentioned that we've talked about, they were not there. I mean, we have records of what was said, how we said we were going to do this and how we were going to handle the records were there. What was said between the both of us, that would be the one concern that I thought they would really pinpoint. When the car turned, it shined into their window. That was a big concern. The last concern is when we're inside, we're making a lot of noise. We've addressed that issue. Those were the issues that we've addressed last time. The parking lot was an issue. We've addressed everything that they've requested. So now to bring the other little stuff, just like we don't want to pick on the other little stuff, because we're neighbors. We're going to rub each other every once in a while, maybe wrongly, but that still doesn't stop, should be a reason why we should be stopped not to grow. I mean, we...
No, please, don't. If you want to speak, don't do it from that. Just out of respect for the process. Thank you, Mr. Crow.
We've addressed the major issues. The biggest concern that I feel that Mr. Crow was complaining about was parking. We've heard it loud and clear. We've made an extra effort in speaking to our other neighbor who is right across the street, who is an industrial, he is a mechanic. He is willing to work with us so that we can address the issues. I don't see how, again, if our building is going to be on the opposite side of Mr. Crow, how it's going to be an issue for him as far as the parking, and we are going to follow the rules if we fall into the city codes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Mensing, welcome. Name and address just for the record, Fred.
I was not sworn earlier.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gelfo, would you please swear Mr. Mensing?
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thanks, Fred.
Fred Mensing, P.O. Box 964, Roseland. This issue of churches and the community always stirs controversy, I guess is what I want to use. I think it's the duty of the Board of County Commissioners in these cases to investigate the complaints of the neighbors and try to, without expense to the taxpayer, guide the churches into, being good neighbors in the community, which is what they want to do themselves. We are supposed to be a nation that was based on Christian Judea principles, a nation where the church and state are separate, and I think the state needs to stay as far out of the church's business as possible. Only where it affects the health, welfare, and safety of people should the church get involved. In my own instance, the church got involved, or the state got involved in an event called the Pumpkin Patch, which is a nationwide event with Methodist churches. I feel that at that time, the Commission should have come to a conclusion of how that type of event could have continued. They need to help these people get what they need to do done so that their neighbors are not in distress and that they can proceed in their religious beliefs. Doesn't matter what they are. But this is the approach as commissioners I feel you need to take, is advisory, bring everybody together to recognize that, the church is a fundamental part of the community that can make or break a community, and that unfortunately there are a few people that are against churches, and I'm sorry, but I do think that, you need to take this approach in these particular cases to, offer solutions to the problem. We shouldn't even have to be here at this board. This should have been all worked out, before it got here.
Thank you, Fred. Spencer, were you sworn in?
No.
Maureen, does anybody else want to speak that didn't get sworn in? We can take care of it all one time.
You spoke before?
Yeah.
Now we're going to have to go back and redo everything.
Either that or a collective sigh of relief we didn't listen to him to begin with.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Maureen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Spencer Simmons Construction and Development, 118 43rd Avenue. I've worked with the pastor on his renovations, his original renovation, and we helped him with putting his sign up. Most of it was pro bono or at cost. That being said, I just want to state that we have LDRs, land development regulations. They are set in place so there could be no arbitrary rulings. I know there could be concerns, but I think we need to stick by our LDRs, because if anytime somebody wants to start moving that goalpost back and forth, we don't have regulations. If Stan, which I have a lot of faith in Stan, good man, I think that if his staff has laid out and said this is what you can do no more, everything fits inside the regulations that have been set in place by this board, previous boards, voted on, however they're put in place, we need to just really stick to those. I know there could be other concerns. That's where code enforcement comes in. I don't know if there was code enforcement violations, people calling in saying, there's code enforcement violations. It seems like there's a lot of, again, maybe nitpicking back and forth. I'm not looking at either side, but I think that if we, as a community, we have LDRs, and if if a property is set properly within those LDRs and they're used to the extent of what the LDR is allowing them to do, we should not arbitrarily begin to move the goalposts just because of one complaint or another. The LDRs are there, set in place to be able to be used for this property. It was grandfathered in. That building's been there probably a lot longer than just about every house in the neighborhood or close to it. So that's been there for a long time, and I think that if it's within the LDR and if Stan and them have said, yes, this is what we've got in place, this is what we can allow, the parking is sufficient, I think the board just needs to go with what the planning and zoning and the Stan and his staff has recommended.
Thank you, Spencer.
Quickly, this approval really isn't, we talked about the parking a lot and about Tim Rhodes' extra parking. This approval isn't based on the parking that we acquired at Tim Rhodes. The criteria has been met without Tim Rhodes. Is that right, Stan? Or wrong?
That's correct, based on the
so that question came up, so I thought that should be made clear. It's not based on Tim Rhodes' parking.
But, Mr. Chairman, I believe that it was brought up because of special events for overflow. Is that correct, Stan?
That's correct. And I think, again, first of all, our minimum parking standards won't park for certain peak events. Generally, 85th percentile is what's used. So there are occasions where people have to wait for a parking space depending on the size of the facility, and overflow parking, I think, is a legitimate thing to address for special events.
And how close are they to the goalpost or the threshold of acceptance?
Well, I think, again, they meet our minimum requirement based on the seating for the sanctuary. I think having a place for overflow parking for special events is a very good idea, because I think they do have them at this church, and I think having a place nearby for additional parking, I think they should have an arrangement for overflow parking.
And the overflow would only take place for those few special events throughout the year, 2 or 3 times.
Whatever agreement they come to with the property owner.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowe.
Chairman.
Like I said before, what is the seating in there? That it's still yet to be. I mean, they say 60. What is it? It hasn't, and without someone definitively, whether it is the fire department, whether it is, somebody said, well, I've been in there and I've counted the seats, and there are.
Let me answer that, or let me have staff try to answer that for you. I think that's a legitimate question that you're asking. Stan, how do we calculate the number of seats inside an institutional facility, and what is the definition of institutional facility?
Right. Churches are a type of institutional use. There are a number of them, and depending on whether there's fixed seating or the seating arrangement, we have the applicant tell us the number of seats that can be occupied in the sanctuary. And again, whether they're pews or individual seats, either way, they have to come up with the calculation, and that's what the engineer has done.
Okay, and then so, Mr. Crowe, if I kind of understand what your concerns are, what you're worried about is, let's suppose that they have the good fortune of saying, okay, we've got the regular service, now we're going to have a youth service, and therefore we're going to have the youth ministry in this hall, and then the existing one. And your concerns are, okay, I'm assuming, can they do that? If they can do that, what's the requirements and what the effect is going to be on you and your family? Stan, and if that's not your concern, let me know.
I mean, basically, they have 63 seats in the sanctuary,
and they're adding this other.
Right, they're not putting.
What can they do, Stan?
Well, again, our minimum requirement is the 21 spaces is all that they need in that situation.
For
the facility itself.
Okay, the new one or the existing?
Well, both.
Okay.
It's again, the minimum requirement is not based upon fellowship hall area.
It's based on seating.
It's based on sanctuary seating. But again, I think it is prudent for the church to address overflow parking for events, and I believe they've.
Okay, but I think Mr. Crowe's concern is if they do turn the fellowship hall into seating, pews, they go in there, let's suppose they put it's big enough that it could double the existing seating, and so let's say they add another 60, what would that mean to parking?
Well, that would increase the parking requirement. If that were used for sanctuary seating for first.
And whether or not they have room for the additional seating for that is unknown at this point, correct? Nobody's done a study on that, and because that's not the intended use. And
that's
if
correct.
they were to do that as the use, if they were to go in there and to do what Mr. Crow is concerned about, then what actions would Mr. Crow be able to do in that situation?
I think what would tend to happen is this. If the sanctuary were to be expanded, we would see an internal building permit modification, and we would catch it at that time that they're expanding the sanctuary space, and we would require them to show that they meet parking requirements.
Okay, and that's based on the number of seats again?
That's correct.
Okay, does that answer your...
So if there were to be any building modifications in the future, we review every one of those, right, and we would see if that's expanding the sanctuary space or not.
And to answer your question, the way this is presented in the fashion from the is you have a church. It's not uncommon to have a fellowship hall. Just because you have a church without a fellowship hall, the use is similar to the same as if you have a church with a fellowship hall. And now, if you have a church with a fellowship hall / that gets turned into a children's ministry, then it's basically two fellowship halls. And then at that time, that would prompt the additional parking requirements. And I don't know whether they have the room there. That's not the question that's being asked of us today.
Right.
But that's that.
Who do I, at some point a year down the, if this passes?
Okay, that's a very good point. Stan, did you understand this question?
A year down the road, let's say I notice there's
chairs,
30 cars.
Okay.
That leads me to believe there's more people.
Stan?
Well, what we can do, whenever we get a complaint, our question will be, has the sanctuary seating been expanded or not? And we can ask that of the church, and we can go and investigate to whatever level that we want. But, or can, under the law, I guess I should say. But, again, we're going to pick up any internal building changes in terms of moving walls around to expand the sanctuary, and that would be our automatic trigger regardless of whether we hear from neighbors or not.
Okay. And so I'm assuming that you would also say not just has the sanctuary seating been expanded, but also has the use of the fellowship hall changed. Would that be a fair question to ask, too?
It is, and I think, again, the way the parking requirements are, if it's a non-sanctuary type of use, if it's fellowship hall, if it's classrooms, again, the peak parking demand is based on the parking requirement on the sanctuary seating.
Right.
So we wouldn't get into if they have tables or chairs set up in a fellowship hall.
Sure.
That's customary.
Right.
Okay. All right. It's just like I said, it's a big open metal building they're putting there. Anything could happen where they don't have to move walls. You know, it's a metal building in a block neighborhood where it's a big open building, as said by the engineer. Anything could happen in there. And I just, like I said, I need to know if it gets passed down the road, who do I call to say, hey, there's 30 cars out here routinely. I think there's more than what's safely, going on, and make that complaint.
Stan?
Right, yeah, one other item. And if the site plan controls how the site is used, and so if there are violations in the future or of any establishment, if, in other words, if people are parking in through driveway areas, that's not allowed. That blocks the traffic circulation and so forth. They have to operate the facility in accordance with the site plan, and if they're not able to do that, they have to seek a remedy. So they will be governed by the site plan that's before you all.
And again, the site plan is for the fellowship hall. That's
okay.
All right.
And like I said, it's a Sunday night. It's off hours, so it's not like I could call up code enforcement and be like, hey, come take a peek. It's after hours.
Our code enforcement never sleeps.
Okay. If they're available, I'll, hopefully I don't have to.
Notify them.
All right. Thank you.
We'll give you the chairman's direct phone number. You can call him.
Sounds wonderful.
He doesn't like sleep either.
Yeah.
Just a quick one.
Sure.
The site plan does dedicate the use of the property, and so when we go in for building permits, we're reviewed by the building department and the fire department. Occupancy is limited by the assembly grouping, and so the square footage, the number of seats that you can get in a building is based on a square footage for each seat. So you have to have a square footage amount for that many seats. The sanctuary as it is now is 463 seats. And so if on assembly type structures like this, the fire department will periodically do inspections to make sure that they're in their seating requirements. And right there, that's where we get into code enforcement.
Yeah.
So they'll be reviewing this public assembly place like this.
Does that answer your question a little bit more, Mr. Crow? Thank you. Yeah, yes.
Patricia Hunt, and I wasn't going to speak, but I am going to speak.
Did you get sworn in?
No, I'll swear in, though. Yes, in Jesus' name. Thank you. There's two church groups of people here. We all know what the Bible says. I was raised in the church. It sounds like some of this stuff is just common sense.
And if you would address the commission versus
I'm sorry,
the
commissioners. Some of this is common sense. I spoke with Chris up here when he came back in. You know, there's some concerns about the crossing on the road, obviously, from what they showed on the maps. And obviously there's children. That's another concern. We don't want to see anybody like one of the commissioners mentioned in Palm Beach have somebody get hit by or struck by a car. I know John's Island Country Club, and I'm not saying it's a country club, but First Church of God. They have a deputy there. They also have a crosswalk that would help. And my other question is, some of these are simple solutions. The pastor of the church, the deacon, they all have positions in the church. Does anybody direct traffic when they do have events so they can direct traffic? I've been to churches from here to Miami to Hawaii and done a lot of fundraising. They could have people direct traffic to make sure people are parking properly. They can make announcements before church. Please don't honk your horn, especially on a Sunday evening, because these people have kids. And I'm not picking on the church. It was a one-time video, and there's probably, people get excited when they walk out of church. That's what it's there for, to praise and worship. But, if people are trying to put their kids to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, some of these are simple solutions that the commissioners shouldn't have to be. The parking is an issue and the growth in the church, but when you look at a church like First Church of God, and there's a bunch of churches on Sundays, you drive down 58th Ave, you see the church is packed. They have people directing traffic, they have volunteers, they have deputies. There are simple solutions, and all I ask is that maybe what we preach, we need to do.
Thank you,
and try to work together.
Thank you. Yes, Spencer.
Just one other thing. King's Baptist, we did our 1914 event. Any of you that didn't go, you missed out. I did a stellar performance, Golden Globe nomination, I think. But anyways, we had over 5,000 people go through there. And we had a lot of off-site parking, and we had to find parking. We got a bus. There is, again, I know that seems to be a concern, is off-site parking. There's always ways to address that. If it's a special events, again, we had over 5,000 people in 8 days. So there was a lot of people went through that event. And there was a lot of off-site parking because there wasn't enough room just from the people that actually put on the performance. There was a couple hundred just in that. And we had to find parking for them, then parking for the people that were coming. And there was a continual flow. Because we were starting a new presentation every 10 minutes. A new group was coming through, so there was constant rotation of people and cars and vehicles. So off-site parking is addressed all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer. Anyone else wish to speak? Anyone else? Okay, at this point we will close the public hearing. And Stan, I just have just a few. Go back to the site plan on the south side of the church, which is, I believe that's the 13th Avenue. That's, I believe, just to the north is, or south of that is where the Crows live, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct, across 13th Place Southwest.
Okay, and now the video that I saw from the Crows showed, and that was the picture I was after, by the way, showed that there appeared to be multi-lanes of parking, like at two at least, I think, run right up. And
you had some double parking behind each other.
Okay.
Right.
Now, is it safe to assume then on that site plan and what we're fixed to approve with that parking that the double lanes will not be allowed now?
That's correct.
And if it is, it'll be a code violation.
That's
is that correct? Okay. All right.
And again, the site plan will control use of the facility.
Okay, and right now there is nothing regulating that whatsoever because it's grandfathered use?
Yes, 1958. We do not have a controlling site plan at this point.
Okay. All right, Commissioners, any other questions? All right, Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
I have a question for Stan on, since this is quasi-judicial.
Correct.
Have to evaluate on the information presented, but we're still granting a special exception use, or is the existing use that's grandfathered already a grandfathered special exception use?
Both.
Both?
It is both. The use is conforming because it is allowed in this zoning district. What's grandfathered in are some of the characteristics of the existing site, the setback of the existing building and the parking on 13th Place Southwest. So those are givens. The request really is only for the Fellowship Hall addition. That's what's being proposed, and then there are some site improvements associated with that. So the special exception are the changes to the site that they're proposing.
Okay, and the LDRs that we have that they followed to create their site plan makes that not an objectionable means because they're complying with the rules that govern how that layout's done.
That's correct.
Also want to say I haven't spoken with him a number of years, but I've known Dave Troska for a long time. Outstanding guy, good guy. No axe to grind, I wouldn't say. And I've not met the Crows, and I can see where they are impacted, but at the same time, the quasi-judicial, in a way, if we don't like something, that's not a justifiable reason for a no vote using the quasi-judicial guidelines. It has to be...
Why don't we ask the attorney on that one if you would like a little clarification on that?
You have specific criteria. Well, let me use that differently. There are general and specific criteria set forth in our code. And what you do is it's your responsibility to review the evidence that you've heard today and or as part of the staff report packet. And you would base your determination based upon the evidence that you've heard and taken on the criteria that are established. And that's going to be the foundation for your decision.
And the criteria would be in basis the LDRs that regulate the site plan design.
Yeah, and your staff's done a great job of kind of going through all of those criteria, telling you about what they were and why they felt their analysis was that they met it. And then in addition to that, you take into consideration of the evidence that you've heard today, and that would be how you would make your decision.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'll go ahead and move staff recommendation, including the conditions staff listed with 1 and 2, and adding D, a crosswalk, as discussed.
Okay. Got a motion from Commissioner Solari to move staff recommendation plus item D with the crosswalk. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman, and just for my comments,
sure.
It's always difficult when you have the conflict of more of a commercially zoned property right next to residential, where obviously it's going to create some issues. I certainly understand the Crow's position, although watching the video, to me, I guess you can say noise is noise, but the noise was generally joyful. I mean, they were laughing. It was positive. I didn't see any vehicles burning rubber or doing anything that I would consider obnoxious. And I can't help but think the proximity to the railroad tracks there, that the regular freight trains coming through there with their horns. I live a mile from the railroad tracks, and I hear the train every night. I would imagine as close as this is to the tracks, that train horn has to be pretty loud. And weighing that compared to some folks, cheerfully saying goodbye and the children laughing. I understand it's a noise, but for where I'm sitting, I don't think it's a noise that should prohibit what they're doing. And the fact that with this site plan, the 10 grandfathered sites will be limited to just the 10, and there won't be any of the double parking. Comparing that to the existing condition where maybe more than 10 cars parked there, I see that as actually a positive. And then the fencing and buffering on the western boundary to that property, I see a benefit. So even with the addition of the Fellowship Hall, by strictly limiting the grandfathered spots to 10, I think is an improvement over the status quo, because the status quo allows more than the 10. They can double up. So from that point of view, I think the addition, instead of creating a parking problem, will actually help limit the parking on 13th Place Southwest. And the additional buffering And the one-way driveway, I think, will help a lot, too. And so that's the basis for my second and support of Commissioner Solari's motion.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Is there any further comment? Yes, Dylan.
If there are any other commissioners who wish to speak first, I'd be happy to defer, but I just want clarification.
Go ahead and clarify.
Okay. Just because this is a quasi-judicial item, I just want to make sure it was the staff report conditions plus that the applicant would install a crosswalk across Old Dixie Highway to the off-site parking, subject to review and approval of the Public Works Department.
No, across Old Dixie parking, not to the off-site parking, which is 250 feet further to the right. Just across Old Dixie.
Across Old Dixie. That's why I'm glad I asked. Subject. And Stan, you understand the condition? Perfect.
I do, and Public Works will have to apply where the proper place to cross is and how it's done.
Sure. Okay, Commissioners, any other comments? Where I am on this is I'm not one to tell the Crows whether or not this is not going to be bad. I trust your judgment on this, and Mr. Tesco, you're right there next to it. I want to believe in my mind that I've got this down to the point that those 10, at least now with the 10 spots to the north of you, or now to the east of your place, this gives you the opportunity to regulate how many cars are there, and if they're turning out and turning on your piece of property. This will make it far enough away to where they can in fact stay on the road versus having to be close enough to the south to make the turn. Again, in the event that this turns into something more than what's being discussed here today, there are rules that are in place to be able to say no, that's not what you approved for. This is an exception, but it is at the same time it's an allowable exception, and a fellowship hall is an allowable exception for a church. So, with that said, I'll be supporting the motion. Is there any further discussion? Yes.
One other question, Stan. If this was a commercial operation, what would the hours of operation be limited to?
Like a retail or restaurant establishment,
Right.
we don't have hours. As far as the zoning code, we do not have hour limits. There are limits for serving alcoholic beverages, but
Okay, what about under the noise ordinance for hours of, after a certain time period?
You're correct. During nighttime hours, we have lower decibel level thresholds, and we don't believe any of them have been
When does that time start?
10 o'clock, 10
so
p.m.
at 10 o'clock?
It changes. In other words, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., our level of acceptable decibel readings is lower.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before we vote, in the video I did notice it looked like there was a whopper of a pothole right in front of the Crow's property there. Could we, as part of this, get Public Works to fill that pothole?
That'd be appropriate. Yeah.
I mean, I just noticed that. And
We've been fighting it forever, but they finally, after damage to my car, it's been fixed.
They got
it has been fixed? Okay. All right. Well, let us know if it pops back up again, because I did see that in that video. And okay.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. At this time, we'll take a 15-minute recess.
Last minute instructions? You're a wise man. As long as Jackie's in the jumper seat, we're all right. Carrots. Good sustenance.
Meeting will come to order.
That's what you call it, huh?
Yeah. Okay.
We'll see after it starts.
Yes. Okay. That moves us to the second public hearing. We have the public items 10-2, which is the repeal of the medical marijuana ordinance memorandum dated December 13th, 2014. And what I'll do is I'll probably, this went to our joint commission, came back for a recommendation, and I'll turn this over to Dylan.
Absolutely, and I'll try to keep this short. Essentially, in anticipation of a vote on Amendment 2 on November 4th, the Board of County Commissioners had adopted Ordinance 2014-18, which established various regulations concerning medical marijuana treatment centers. Amendment 2, as you all know, failed. And thus, on November 18th, the board authorized the county attorney's office to draft an ordinance which would repeal such regulations. Therefore, that is what the county attorney's office has done. We've drafted such an ordinance and are presenting that to you today. The recommendation from the county attorney is merely that you open the public hearing, take any input, and close the public hearing, and then vote to adopt the ordinance. With that, I am here for any questions.
Any questions of legal counsel? Seeing none, we will open up the public hearing. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to address the issue of the repeal of the medical marijuana ordinance? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and let the record show that ample opportunity to address this issue has been provided to all. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
Move approval of the amended ordinance.
Second. Motion from Commissioner O'Brien with a second from Commissioner Slaughter. Yes, discussion, Commissioner Zort.
Yes, I'm in favor of the motion, but we'll just have
Turn your light on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. That the recent announcement of former Lieutenant Governor Codcamp to lead the medical marijuana second attempt is underway with John Morgan. So we'll just have to watch this as it goes and see what appropriate action we need to take in the future.
Thank you.
Right, and that was my concern when we voted to come to this point, but the rest of the board felt we can keep an eye on it and react appropriately, but it is good to be vigilant.
Yeah, and I really hope that as it moves forward, if there are some merits that are brought forward in round two, if you will, that they get addressed the old-fashioned way through the legislative process and signed by the governor versus applause meter.
And I'll only suggest that if it does come as another amendment, that we begin an education process sooner, because it was clear from our public hearing that there was a lot of confusion about the amendment, and I think that was purposeful on the part of the people who were promoting it. And so many people were unaware of what was already in place by our state legislature. I believe our state legislature is going to take up different aspects of it this year.
I do too.
So I think that the more education we can do, and especially inviting the sheriff in to help educate the public, the better.
Okay. All right. Is there any further discussion? If not, we've got a motion on the floor by Commissioner O'Brien made it, I think, and Commissioner Solari seconded. And if there's no further discussion, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Next, that moves us into the public discussion items. We'll go straight into public discussion item B2. Mr. Mensing, welcome.
Congratulations, gentlemen. Because of your inaction, I am technically homeless. I am here to ask that you would authorize the county administrator, the county risk manager, County Attorney's Office to sit down with Johnny L. Davis Jr. and myself to see if we can arrive at a settlement immediately in the next 30 days or less, to avoid having to go to litigation, which I have attorneys in line. They do not represent me. They do not think I should even offer to make you this offer today. They advised against it. They feel that the amount of money that can be recovered is exorbitant compared to what this might be settled for today. This will take and get us back in a place to live like human beings instead of, the situation we find ourselves in. I'm asking that this be done at this time or be rejected, and then, the chips will fall where it may. Mr. Zork, I understand from a third party that's spoken with your attorney that you had issues with a settlement. I wish that somebody would have brought these up, because each of the issues would have solved itself had we not had two monkey wrenches thrown at us. Mr. Collins and his action of February 2008 and Resolution 2008-043, which was engineered by Mr. Carey, who presently is the owner of our property. And it'll be pointed out that in the days when Tom Lowther and Ruth Stanbridge were on the commission, I think it was 2002, Mr. Carey, who demanded the road in 2008, and you bought him hook, line, and sinker as a commission. Some of you weren't sitting at that time. Forget 2002, the offer was made to Mr. Carey by the commission, and study done totally, to move my mobile home, replace the 20 by 40 concrete block building that was in the road right of way, create a paved road from Mr. Carey's property out to 130th Street and down to where the paving ended the dump, provided he would agree to vacate the use of 129th Street, which was given to him by the Department of Community Affairs. He refused. He did not want the road that he could have had paved for free. He's suffering with a dirt road, and now he wants the dirt road which you gave him, and the next step he will want it abandoned. And that is why and you have the paper from Mr. Reingold, I'm sure, we are asking that a 99-year moratorium be put in, that you cannot vacate that property for 99 years unless you pay my stepson and I or our heirs, because that also cost us property. That will cost you no money. I'm asking you to, at this time, make the decision. Do we go the route that I just suggested, which would be the right thing to do to get this to go away, to get people's lives back in order, or else the reverse is we're going to be tied up in court. I have, as I said, a law firm that is ready for me to go sign on the dotted line, and they say I shouldn't settle for anything less than $100,000 from you, and I'm willing to sit down and talk to you. So JJ, who is a Marine veteran, who has a disability from having a Humvee blown 150 feet off a road that he was in, and I have a place to live, it's in your hands right now to make this decision, and it's not something you can come back to me tomorrow. You either authorize Mr. Baird, the administrator, the risk manager, Mr. Dillon's office to sit down with us and arrive at the settlement agreement outlined somewhere as on this paper. If you have questions about the settlement from 2002, that it couldn't have been accomplished, it all could have been accomplished. The attorney that wrote the letter, the memo that I think Mr. Zork is referring to, I had a meeting at one time in Fort Mill, South Carolina, that's outside Charlotte, when Bank of America was still doing reverse mortgages. 3 attorneys there said he was probably the stupidest attorney around and that he was probably the main reason Riverside Bank failed. And that memo is so full of failure, I should have gotten my back up in the air when I saw it, but I thought people were more intelligent to be able to look through it and see what it said and what the settlement that the county violated court rules and everything else, and you're given the opportunity today to say, we'll make something part right and have it all go away. It's in your hands now. I'm asking somebody make a motion in a second and see if you can authorize the suggestion that Mr. Dillon's staff, office, the risk manager, and Joe Baird, within their discretionary powers, arrive at a settlement with us and get it over with.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Mensing? Commissioners, anything?
Mr. Mensing, earlier you pointed out that your address was a post office box.
Yes.
I don't know if that was, you can do that out of preference. You can do that with your driver's license as well. But you are physically living somewhere, as testament you are here right now. It was never the intention of this commission or previous commissions to compel you to be homeless. And this is something that's been going on for about 10 years, in which we've heard much of it in many different angles of the argument. Where are you currently living right now?
Where's what?
Where are you currently living right now? Where are you residing?
A couple of nights here and a couple of nights there with friends.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other questions, Commissioner? Any other comments? Thank you, Fred.
Are we going to get a motion, or is
I don't think so.
Okay. I guess we'll have to see each other in court rather than have it go away. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Fred.
I'm sorry for this county. I'm sorry for you commissioners.
The next item on the public discussion items is the request to speak from Patricia Hunt regarding All Aboard Florida information and public records. Ms. Hunt, welcome.
And I'll be brief, gentlemen. First and foremost, Commissioner Davis, thank you very much, and I apologize I didn't address you in the church and situation. I have been dealing with a 6-week head cold.
Sure. And it's not to address me. It is
the commission
board, yes.
in general.
Yes.
So I'm addressing you now. Commissioner Davis, Commissioner Solari, Commissioner Flesher, and Commissioner O'Brien, and Commissioner Zorick, and the County Commissioner Baird, and Reginald, the county attorney, and clerk of court, Mr. Smith, who apparently isn't here right now. And I apologize. I meant no disrespect whatsoever. With that being said, I would commend the commissioner on what you spoke earlier in reference to government officials, and I would highly recommend you run for a Congress position, Commissioner Solari. I do feel that after what you stated, it has been going on long in the government. 2015 officers, and I know I've read some articles that Commissioner Flesher has spoken in reference to the governor, and it's been quoted in the media as far as the governor's take on this All Aboard Florida train. I actually spoke with the Department of Transportation in Washington, and I have some information which I'll be happy to forward and email all of you, having to do with the officer of the Executive Committee, Transport and Research Committee, Daniel Sperling, a professor of civil engineering and environmental science, University of California, Davis Institute of Transportation, and a Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons actually does all the investigative work for high-speed trains. That's his specialty. He travels around the United States and international, both with safety and what trains have worked, why they haven't worked, and different matters. And I'll be happy to forward that email to all of you. Sarah Finberg, Acting Administration of Federal Railroad Administrator. I've also spoken to their office, and there's a meeting coming up in Orlando. It's like an MBA conference for pilots, and they thought best that in Washington there's going to be a committee meeting, and it's more having to do with addressing high-speed trains, safety, and I just thought if I could network one of you or all of you to the people who are in charge of that committee. It's similar to an FAA conference where all the pilots from all around the world come. They discuss safety issues with Department of Transportation, similar with the trains. And with that being said, I thought that maybe one of the commissioners may want to join, since you're dealing with other counties, Stewart and other areas, possibly go to Washington, D.C., and go to attend one of these committees, because it has a lot of information having to do with the high-speed trains, and they felt the conference in Orlando would not be as beneficial as the one coming up in Washington, D.C. in the spring, and I will forward that information to all of you at a later date. I was here to speak in reference and to have videotape. Unfortunately, that has been uncooperative, and with that agency, with the Indian River County Sheriff's Department, and I was hoping Sheriff Laurel would have stayed along with the Clerk of Court, Mr. Smith. I know I've been here, and I've been here numerous times asking for public records. I know your hands are tied, but I want this on the public record, because as of right now, I have filed a federal court order in reference to, and I actually on Christmas Eve came by, not how I wanted to spend my Christmas Eve, gentlemen, and to your offices and dropping off a document having to do with, again, harassment at the Indian River County Courthouse, a public building, where my attorney asked me to please go in and get some documents for my Florida Supreme Court case, and I had a sergeant that harassed me, stood over my shoulder, and in business school we learn a certain space for people when we talk, just like you have your space right now, and I'm not close to you talking. They teach you the same thing in business school. And unfortunately, this deputy, I had asked him several times to please step away. He made the clerk uncomfortable. And there was a cart of records I was trying to look at. After he stood over my shoulder, he then decided to stand in front of the cart. I had to ask him to move several times. I asked if there was video surveillance not to be moved, altered, or destroyed, and if the security cameras were working, because according to the Sheriff's Department, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Well, according to the county, at other county courthouses across the state of Florida, those cameras, according to county security in different counties, are supposed to be working at all times to protect the judges first and the public second, especially now with what we had to deal with terrorists and other suggestions, other violent acts. So with that being said, I am here once again to put on the public record my one of numerous requests for the week of Christmas Eve, December 23rd and 24th, which I actually hand-delivered in your county attorney, who I have no issues with the county or the county attorney, but to make public record. And I'm aware Attorney General Pam Bondi has a lot to do with the Sheriff's Department. However, because of her political career after she serves for the state of Florida as the Attorney General, is in no means going to get wrapped up in any kind of dealing with corrupt officials, having to do with hurting her potential career in Washington. I am here asking once again for November 29th, 30th, 2012. We are now in 2015, gentlemen. December 20th, 2012, where we had a meeting with the Clerk of Court, a professional business meeting, and myself and several other pro se litigants, which I'm not here as a lawyer or to practice law without a license, which is what Mr. Smith has made clear, false accusations. I am here actually as a person who has been wronged their 14th Amendment rights to a jury trial from an accident case that's been pending since the accident in 2005, where there were an off-duty police officer, thank God, outside this county, along with witnesses that are credible. I even went so far to recuse a judge because of keeping something politically correct off her record in a sworn affidavit that was supposed to be private, that wasn't supposed to get leaked, which I had nothing to do with. January 3rd, January 5th, 2013, March 27th, 2013, where a falsified document, Lieutenant Mullenix and other witnesses, where I was falsified a trespassing in a public courthouse where I had court cases pending including a United States federal FAA predatory lending case. January 22nd, 23rd, September 12th, 2013, of a clerk ripping evidence out of a court file, and now December 23rd and 24th, the week of Christmas Eve. Gentlemen, I have to go back into that courthouse. I have not been able to actually, my attorney has been out of state, and I had to go in and get documents. Now this county has obstructed justice with my court case since the lower court. Now we're in the higher court with the Florida Supreme Court. Not only have I written asking to be as an advocate on this committee in the Florida Supreme Court, which I know you have no jurisdiction over, and I'm not asking for any jurisdiction. I'm asking for the Florida Supreme Court Judge LaBargia to ask permission, along with the Florida Bar ACAB. Bar complaints having to do with an attorney who threatened people to kill people in a public building down in Fort Pierce, who has appeared and demonstrated both here in Indian River County and in Fort Pierce to be highly unstable in front of a behavioral therapist, in front of deputies, and then wrote stuff in the court having to do with basically threats to myself and to a county judge. Now, I'm sorry, but the bottom line is this needs to be public, and I didn't want to have to go public with any of this. But the fact that I have asked Clerk of Court Mr. Smith and his attorney, Mr. Barquette, for records of every single employee since 2007 handling those files. I still have not received that. I've done written requests. My attorney is about to do written requests, and I'm about to file a federal court order with a federal judge getting those requests. I'm tired of the nonsense. I'm tired of the threats and the harassment. It's to the point where this cost me a family member because of nonsense that this should have never escalated this far. Now, I have lived in this county on and off for almost 15 years. I came here to go to flight school. I didn't come here to take on the Sheriff's Department, the Clerk of Court, and yes, he's been a standing community person. However, instead of making and saying there's a law, we made an error and a mistake, he tried to cover it up. And he's done this with other people. There are depositions missing out of Maria Christine Camacho's versus Ross Dress for Less case. Those affidavits, I know because I filed them before her summary judgment. Those documents are missing. And I want to quote for the record 8.3925. Official misconduct. This section is a felony of a third degree punishable as provided corrupt means done with knowledge the act that is wrongful and improper motives of official misconduct. 83.925. Excuse me, gentlemen, I've had a head cold for 6 weeks and I'm not feeling that great, and I really did not want to have to be here at this meeting because I thought the sheriff would cooperate and give me the video surveillance on the week of Christmas Eve. But we're going to play these political games, and now this is going on the public record. Corrupt means done with knowledge, the act of wrongful and with improper motives. Official misconduct means coming of the following act of a public servant with corrupt intent to obtain benefit for himself or herself or another to cause unlawful harm to another. Knowingly, falsely, or causing another the falsifying of any official record or any official document. 83.924. These are Florida statutes I'm reading. Penalty for failure to perform a duty required of an officer of a sheriff, county court, judge, prosecuting officer, court reporter, stenographer, or other officers required to perform any duty under the criminal to proceed use of law who knowingly fails to perform the law to perform his or her duty shall be guilty of a misdemeanor or second degree punishable by law. Now, my goal was not to come in here and attack the sheriff. But the bottom line is, when I was here at one of the meetings, when the sheriff and Judge Cox came in here and waltzed in here and asked for $100 and some odd thousand, one of the commissioners blatantly stated, and I was grateful for that they just, you walk in here, you have to file protocol like everybody else and fill out the proper paperwork. You gentlemen are here doing your job. What I've seen from all of you is you care about the people. Now, I'm to the point where I'm sorry, but this is absolutely ridiculous. I would be happy to call the sheriff's attorney right now on the phone and ask him about these records, because what I'm going to get is an excuse, a delay, and it's been delayed since 2012. So now I'm going to be filing a federal court order. And now the Sheriff's Department has just bought themselves a civil rights lawsuit for obstructing justice in 2 court cases, with a predatory lending law case along with a personal injury case. And I'm sorry it's come to that, gentlemen, but I'm to the point where they put me in checkmate. They are now in checkmate. I am not done with this. I am done with the political nonsense and the Sheriff's Department covering up. In 2013, this is public record. It was in the 32963 newspaper, and I doubt very much the editor is going to publish something that she's going to be sued for, or he's going to be sued for. There's a Florida law enforcement investigation that they were in trouble for apparently altering records. This was around the same time that they falsified trespassing inside a public court building. I had a deputy in front of witnesses blatantly make threats to giving me a criminal record. Well, that's on the record now, because there were witnesses who've also been threatened and harassed by deputies in and outside the courthouse. A public building means a public building. When people have court cases, they should be allowed to go into the courthouse and get access to the records, both online or paper files, period. End of story. That's what the public building, a courthouse, is for. And it's supposed to be for due process. But apparently, what I was told is the good old boys. Well, let me tell you about the good old boys. I'm a good girl from upstate New York, and my dad taught me how to play with the good old boys. I'm not playing with the good old boys. I played with them in FAA flight training school. I earned my wings and earned the respect out of military pilots when I was flying. I'm done playing games. It's to the point where this is official, and I am no longer blowing smoke. There will be a federal lawsuit filed within the statute of limitations against the Sheriff's Department, and I am asking for public records of every single lawsuit since Sheriff Laurel has been in office, which he's a sheriff. He should be well aware of what's going on in his county and his office and how many lawsuits are pending against him.
And hold that just for 1 minute, not to interrupt or anything. One of the things that concern me the most, Ms. Hunt, is that for you to ask for public records and for me to miss it. With you, that to me is, according to the law, what you just asked for is request enough, whether that was on TV or not.
Yeah.
Just the request of the Chapter 119 statute, that was enough. And so I guess really in this whole thing, I'm pretty sure that we're not the custodian of the records that you're asking for specifically.
You're not.
And I just want to make sure that if there is something, I'm not saying be overly obvious, but what I am saying is try not to get it shuffled and lost in the other public record requests that you're asking for, because clearly this board, we believe in transparency and being as forthright as we possibly can, and it would really pain any of us up here to overlook one because of it being folded inside a larger request that's outside of our realm of jurisdiction.
No, and I understand that, and that's why I'm making this public record, because I believe the county attorney called me and asked me and letting me know that it was out of their jurisdiction. Okay. So I am just speaking here publicly.
Well, now, okay, but keep in mind that speaking here publicly, I don't know that meets the public records request. I mean, for example, I could go outside and speak.
This should.
Okay, I'm not. Is that me?
Nope,
No,
this
that
is
she's
me.
playing something.
Oh.
Hi, yes. Can I speak with Attorney Mr. Hartman, please?
Miss Hunt.
Miss Hunt,
please.
Miss Hunt.
Thank you.
I'll handle it, Dylan.
Well, we can find on the record.
No, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to take a phone call in front of you.
This is what I've had to deal with.
And if you call our utilities department, you'd probably be on hold right now too. So I'm not after that. Go ahead and thank you. Hang up.
This is what I've had to deal with.
I respect that. I really do. But this is not the venue to put everything on hold. Miss Hunt, please. I want to help you, but I'm not going to sit here and do that. Miss Hunt?
That's what I've had to deal with.
Thank you very much.
I think you need to adjourn the meeting until this is clear.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your help in doing that, Ms. Hunt. That moves us to the next item, which is the public discussion item, which is a request to speak from Mr. Paladin. And I think we'll invoke the 3-minute rule here, Jimmy.
About ready to adjourn the meeting?
And we should make him swear in again, just because he missed it the first time.
I'm not even offended by that. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm just here to give you an update on a project I took over back in June of 2014. It was on 45th Street, the AAA salvage yard. cleanup matter. It had been in violation for several years, and when I took it over, the first meeting I attended was at the Environmental Board meeting. And to let you know where we started with this, and quickly I'll get to where we are. We had recommendations to make this a criminal action, file liens against everybody's properties, call in the National Guard. We had a lot of recommendations that would have wound up in court and would still be in court today, and the people on 45th Street in Gifford would still have a mess out there. So I asked them to give me a week to try and put a plan together. They did. I put a plan together. I got power of attorney. I got full financial support from the gentleman who owned the property down in Fort Lauderdale, who didn't own the property when all these violations took place, by the way. He got the property through a foreclosure proceeding on a debt that wasn't paid to him. So he kind of inherited the property. And I think if he had to do over again, knowing what he knows now, he probably wouldn't have taken the property. Right. But he did. And he hired me to see if I could clean up the property. He met me up here, told me that, Mr. Palin, I had no idea that this existed. I never saw the property before. Can you make this right? I said, I can make it right if you give me power of attorney and give me full financial support. And he did that. So based on that happening, we went forward. We cleaned the property up. We thought we had like 1,000 tires or so and some trash, and I didn't think it was a big deal. Well, when we got done, we disposed of 300,000 pounds of trash and 9,000 buried tires. So that was significantly larger than what I thought we were going to run into. But we did it, took care of it. We had hazardous waste on site, gas containers, oil drums. We disposed of all the hazardous waste properly and legitimately. We hired a local environmentalist engineer, Tim Maslin, who works with MBV Engineering, actually. We hired Dr. Cox to do a phase one and to take care of the tortoise situation there. We moved the tortoises exactly the way we should. We disposed of everything on site, all 300,000 pounds of trash, all the 9,000 tires, and we have receipts, and we turned that into the health department. Mr. Charles Voigt, he kind of oversaw everything we did. We accounted to him daily, along with Roland Du Bois. And I want to say this before I finish. With the Environmental Board and with the Health Department, Cheryl Dunn, Charles Voigt, with Roland Du Bois from our code enforcement, they were all great. If they didn't support me the way they did, and they didn't work with me the way they did, there's no way I could achieve this without their help. They were great in helping me get through this, and they should be commended for their help on this. So instead of us having a court action and going to court and spending thousands and thousands of dollars, we spent the money to clean up the site. So today what you have a green grassy field, no trash. The front and the back of this piece of property is landscaped, and we have mulch around the trees. We saved all the oak trees around the entire property, didn't lose any trees on the property, and we have written confirmation that there's no hazardous waste left on the property, and it's safe. And we have a couple more tests that we have to run that takes time. There's like 100 different tests you have to run on soil samples. We're in the process of running those now. We have no reason to believe that there's anything that's going to come back after everything else we did. We did radar penetration after we cleared the site, and we dug 10 to 12 feet down in some cases to find trash that determined it was underground. We went all the way to, we didn't ask for any exceptions whatsoever. We did everything right, properly, and I think you can be proud of your people, staff, code enforcement, the health department, all working together as a team. That's how this got done. So I want to thank them. I want to thank you for letting me do it, and I just think that you deserve an accounting of what happens when you approve something like this to make sure it's followed through with and it wasn't in bad faith. So I want to tell you it was followed through with, and I want to thank you all and tell you this was a successful project in my opinion. Thank you. I have no complaints. I'm not asking for anything.
Thank you.
And Mr. Palin, what is the future of that property now?
The future of that property, as far as I'm concerned, and the owner's concerned, as far as I know, just speaking for myself, is to remain just what it is, a grassy field. I hired a landscaping company to keep it up and to keep the lawn cut and to keep it looking nice so when you drive down the street you don't see weeds. And the Sheriff's Department is working with me to monitor the site to make sure there's no illegal dumping there. And as far as I'm concerned, it's going to look like that forever. Someday, if somebody buys one thing for sure, let me make this point. The salvage yard that was there is no longer grandfathered in. That's gone. It'll never be a salvage yard again unless you all see fit to approve that, which I can't possibly see that happening. But if someday somebody buys the site and wants to put a business on it that you all approve and the neighborhood approves, and it provides good jobs for the area, maybe that'll happen. But we have nothing planned at this time other than keeping it up, keeping the grass cut, keeping it manicured so it looks nice when you drive down the street. And really the only people who should be unhappy with what we have there is probably the other pieces of land along the site, because they're going to have to come up to that standard from now on.
So there's no anticipated plans, and the Gifford community will be greener for a long period of time?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions, Commissioners?
Nope.
Thank you,
Great
Mr.
job.
Joe. Thanks,
Great
Joe.
job.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes our citizen input portion. That moves us to the public notice items, and I'll turn this over to our county attorney for the verbiage. Dylan.
Thank you very much to the chair and to the full board, those left in the audience and those watching at home. We have several public notice items. The first is Beth Ann Adamer's request for special exception use and conceptual plan development PD approval for a project to be known as Hampton Woods East. This will be a quasi-judicial item, and this hearing will be on January 20th, 2015. Additionally, for January 20th, 2015, we have to consider adopting a resolution with regard to electing to use the uniform method for the levy collection and enforcement of non-ad valorem assessments to recover costs of street lighting and maintenance in the Oceanside replat subdivision area. Also is to consider adopting a resolution with regard to electing to use the uniform method for the levy collection and enforcement of non-ad valorem assessments to recover costs of street lighting and maintenance in the Oslo Park area. Finally, is to consider adopting a resolution with regard to electing to use the uniform method for the levy collection and enforcement of non-ad valorem assessments to recover costs of street paving and maintenance in the Oceanside replat subdivision area. All of these public hearings will be set for January 20th, 2015. And with that, I turn it back over to the chair.
All right, thank you very much. And now that moves us past the county administrator and departmental matters all the way down to human resources. OMB, funding request, additional position for problem-solving courts. Memorandum dated January 7th, 2015, found on pages 203 to 215 in your backup. Mr. Brown, welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. For the record, Jason Brown, County Budget Director. Also today we have here Tom Janung, the court administrator, is available if you have any questions for him. So we have a request from court administration for an additional for funding for an additional position. That's a cost of about $53,000 per year. This position would support one of the now 16 problem-solving courts of the circuit. A problem-solving court is a drug court, mental health court, or veterans court. And as you know, earlier this fiscal year, the board approved funding for a new mental health court. So the court administrator has requested this additional position to support, as I understand, all of the problem-solving courts. However, it appears the impetus for this particular request is the addition of the mental health court that was approved here for January 1st. Staff has various concerns about this, one of which is the timing. We like to stick to the process of that May time period when everyone requests all of the funding. We can put everything together and not make ad hoc decisions on how we're going to allocate fund dollars. County also has concerns about funding this and other things funded out of the Court Innovations Fund due to the long-term viability of that. I'll say right now we have a moderate surplus in the Court Innovations Fund. Those are to be expended basically at the direction of the chief judge. So staff feels we have limited ability to say we shouldn't spend these dollars. However, we have a long-time concern that at some point we can run out of those court innovation funds, and then the likely funding source at that point is county general fund dollars if this is to continue from a local funded standpoint. We don't recommend that. So basically at the end of the day, we've got three different alternatives. One is authorized funding for this position. The cost to us, I mentioned it's a $53,000 position. However, Indian River County is responsible for 23% of the expenses of the circuit, which includes St. Lucie, Martin, Okeechobee, and ourselves. So we pay 23%, and that amounts to about $12,000 and change. However, with the caveat that this not be funded this and some of the other expenses that are funded by court administration, if there is a shortfall in future years, which we anticipate, that those not be funded from general fund dollars. Alternative 2 is just to approve the funding request, and then alternative 3 is to deny the funding request. We're recommending alternative 1 to fund this for now out of the court innovations funds, with the caveat that we're concerned about this on a long range funding standpoint, and that we're not recommending these expenditures continue on if it needs to be from county general fund dollars. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'm available.
No questions.
Any questions? Anybody from the public wish to speak on this issue?
Good afternoon. Tom Janung, Trial Court Administrator.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you for entertaining this issue. I appreciate that this was out of sequence. Normally we make such requests when we submit our annual budget request, but the issue came up to us. I became aware of the issue in October of 2014, which was well after the submission of the budget request. And speaking with my staff, speaking with the Chief Judge instructed that we needed to go forward and seek funding from the counties, all 4 counties, for this case manager position. And let me just suggest the importance of that. And I'm not sure how well the commissioners are steeped in the problem-solving courts or drug court or mental health court, veterans court. But these are all courts that spend a large amount of time working with individuals in our community that have been arrested for various things. And the idea is to rehabilitate them, to get them back to a point where they can come back into the community and function appropriately in the community. And so that's very intensive work of the judge, the very intensive work of the other participants that assist in those court processes. And it's one of the things that really mandates the intense work of a case manager, a dedicated case manager. And so that's why we're going to all 4 counties, because without the assistance of that dedicated case manager working with the judge, these courts really aren't that successful.
Any questions or comments, Commissioners? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we follow staff recommendation for alternative 1. But I'd like to add to that we send a letter to our legislative delegation and urging them to fund the court administration at an appropriate level.
Second. Got a motion from Commissioner O'Brien with recommendation number 1, and then an additional letter urging them to fund the court at an additional level. Any further discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, actually, only because Commissioner O'Brien and I are on such an agreeable streak will I actually vote with this motion, but my leaning is actually towards denying the funding and request court administration to submit this position for state funding as is more appropriate. And again, this is the type of thing where we're told about the mental health court because it was going to save funds. If this was known about last October, then this should have been at the minimum part of the process when the sheriff and Judge Cox came before us then. I am still at this point skeptical that the county is going to realize the savings that we've been promised, and this seems to me to be going in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. That moves us to the county attorney matters, which is the tourist development vacancy. Dylan, welcome.
Thank you very much. Essentially, George O'Malley resigned late last year. That opened up a position on the TDC, which was involved in the tourist industry, is 2, interested in tourist development, and 3, is not an owner-operator of a hotel, motel, or similar type facility. County Attorney's Office had reviewed the applications and determined that there were 5 eligible applications. We merely present those to the board today, and we recommend first that you open up to see if there are any public comments on the item, and then determine whether to appoint one of the 5 to fill the vacancy. And with that, I turn it back over to the chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Commissioner Flesher, as chairman of the TDC, I'll give you the opportunity to speak first.
Thank you. And I wanted to return that favor by saying thank you for your appointment as well as Commissioner O'Brien's appointment. And this will be the third year in which I have the opportunity to be the chair of the TDC. As you know, a lot of great work is being done in the Tourist Development Council, and the absence of Mr. O'Malley will be felt. He provided for another unique element of input. I think we have a diverse group. It is a little, it is geared towards the tourist development angle of heads to beds and to building this into a greater community for tourism. And with that, we do have a few members on the board that are from the hotel industry. I've had the opportunity to interrelate with all of the members over the years, and in particular, looking at some of the applicants. The only applicant that came to mind that was really strong and forward about the interest of being on the Tourist Development Council was Mr. Stephen Hayes. As you know, that he had applied in the past, and he did not attend the meeting or have any interviews, and this time around he has done that. I don't know if any of you have met with him, but I want you to know that he did take the time to sit in on the last tourist development meeting, I think the past two, as well as request some research and documentation from past meetings for the past 2 years. And he did give me the opportunity to explain, or he had the opportunity to explain his relationships in the community. I want you to know that I've witnessed them, and they are vast. He is involved with some of the lodging facilities. He operates a successful airboat tourism guide business out west of town, and we constantly see him traveling about with groups of individuals on the lakes as well as in the community. He does have a keen interest, and I would like the opportunity to nominate him for appointment.
Second. Got a motion from Commissioner Flesher to nominate Steve Hayes to the TDC. It's been seconded by Commissioner Zort. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Yes, come on up, please.
Open discussion.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Please give your name and address for the record.
Yes, my name is Barry Shapiro. I am one of the people that had been nominated, or however this process works. I'm at 1954 Westminster Circle in Vero Beach.
Thank you, Barry.
Before the nominations got shut, since I've met some of you gentlemen before, I haven't met all of you, but I did want to introduce myself and say that this position opening was brought to my attention by the Cultural Council, Barbara Hoffman. I worked very closely with George O'Malley for the last several years in a number of capacities. I own Lighthouse Art and Framing, which is on 14th Avenue, downtown Vero Beach. So I'm very familiar with tourism, the arts. I was on the Chamber of Commerce Tourism Committee for a short while. I've been involved in a lot of different things. I'm on the currently on the Vero Beach City Parking Committee and the excuse me, the Downtown Business District Development Committee. My background is in advertising and marketing. 35 years in advertising and marketing. I've owned my business here in Vero for 5 years. And I just want to say that no matter who gets appointed to this position, it's a very important position. Last year, when we were looking to establish the downtown arts district, I had said to the members of the Vero Beach City Council at that time that, things change all the time, and Indian River County and Vero Beach and Bellsmere and Sebastian are going through a process of change all the time. And as you look forward down the road, you want to really look and see what kind of changes you want to affect, rather than them just coming upon us, how we can create that change. And a big part of that in this county is tourism, because so many people come here for arts, for recreation, for sports, for the lagoon, for the beaches. There is a budding wedding industry out here. All of these things are important. All of these things are relevant, because as people come to the county to see these things, to involve themselves and to enjoy these things, they see us and they see what's available here and they go, I'd like to live here. So there's a big connection between tourism and what our future is in this region. And so I threw my hat into the ring. I'd like very much to participate in the process, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Fletcher.
Mr. Shapiro, I just want to let you know that I truly appreciate your desire to commit, and it sounds like you get it just by what you've just explained. And if that's the case, I'd like you to come to the Tourist Development Council meetings, because the TDC is not your average committee. It's an incubator. There's an open forum. We look for ideas, and we want you to hear them. We would like to hear some of your ideas as well. And perhaps maybe we can see this application once again.
Thank you.
So I would invite you to come to the meetings. We meet 4 times a year.
Yes, I know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
No. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Commissioner, any other discussion?
Just, I think we had 5 really great candidates.
Yes.
I think my personal preference would be maybe one of the folks with the marketing directors, like from the theater and from the art museum, or Mr. Shapiro. But I think Steve will be a good candidate as well. So I'll go ahead and support that. But we had 5 really good applicants, I thought.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner
I'd just like to say that I haven't talked to Steve personally about this current position, but that was my first choice when a prior vacancy had opened up and there was an opening. I see the growing segment of the ecotourism market that he's filling is really one of the accelerating parts of the tourism economy. So I think he'll do a good job and bring a little bit different insight to the committee.
Well, Mr. Hayes, as a matter of fact, last night called me, and he was actually at a trade show in the Villages up in Sumter County, and up there with a tourism trade show, and the question came up, it was, hey, is it legal to take metal detectors and hunt for treasure on the coast? And I said, well, it's kind of why we're called the Treasure Coast, and yes, it is. I said, if it's not legal, I don't know that we've banned it as an ordinance, but they're talking about having some people actually come down from that area that are in a whatever kind of club it is, metal detector club. So anyhow, just pass that along. He's up there working right now trying to spread his business.
Just to show that we'll take all kinds of tourists.
That's it. We'll take them all.
Did you tell them they have to come down here and submit an application, and they have to stay here for 5 days waiting period? Then they can start looking for treasure.
I told him.
You get them now. For a week.
That was only if they decide to go offshore and join Mel Fisher. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. That motion passes unanimously. Next, we move to the
Move staff recommendation for the final payment of the roof authority for IRC bid number 2014047.
Thank you very much.
And did you want to include the minutes of the 2 meetings
for the
with your
18th
motion there?
and the
Well, just to make it, we'll do it one at a time.
Yeah. You want the gavel while you're at it?
Just to show you how it might work, Mr. Chairman.
All those in favor of the roof authority's bid signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. That motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the approval of the minutes of the meeting on November 18th and December 2nd.
Thank you very much. I will second that one. I've got a motion from Commissioner Solari on the minutes for the November 18th and December 2nd of 2014 for the Emergency Services District. If there's no further discussion, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's no further business to be transacted at this time, I now declare this meeting adjourned.